Chapter 946. With a single thought, the bright red river shook slightly, and the entire void suddenly underwent an earth-shattering change. In an instant, the world flipped, and the laws of the entire void changed completely, becoming a law that the Talisman Monarch had never imagined. It was a law that was completely different from the dream world. Amidst this change, an indescribable feeling of weakness arose in the Talisman Monarch's heart. This feeling of weakness was not the kind of weakness that one would feel when they were actually injured. Instead, it was a feeling of powerlessness, as if they possessed endless power but were unable to use it at all. They were unable to use even a little bit of it. As soon as this feeling of weakness appeared, the Talisman Monarch felt that his altar had suddenly lost its function. The absolute defense formed by the altar and the light barrier lost all its defensive capabilities in an instant. Under the bright red river, it shattered with a loud bang, turning into countless fragments and powder that scattered in all directions like clouds. The bright red river poured into the Talisman Monarch's body, which was originally protected by the light barrier and the altar, without holding back at all. It directly blasted into his soul and completely absorbed his life force into the bright red river. The bright red river was a combination of power that could completely unleash the profound power of the Aeritide. It was natural that it was powerful, but more importantly, it had all kinds of incredible uses, all kinds of magical effects that only the Aeritide could have. Changing the laws of the void was one of these magical effects. The tide of the times was the source that caused the entire universe to change every 5-6 billion years. The change of every era represented a complete change in the rules and laws. It represented the birth and death of the world's will, and even the change of the great Tao. Although the Aeritide that Luo Fan had comprehended was only a billionth of the true Aeritide, and it was impossible for it to completely change the laws of the entire universe. However, after what he had done before, this void had long become no different from the true Aeritide. It had long become no different from what he had created himself. It was not difficult for him to completely change the laws of this void, let alone the Aeritide flag. Of course, although he could also change the laws of this void, compared to the Aeritide flag's changes, there were traces of his changes. His change was traceable. No matter how big the change was, it wouldn't affect the Talisman Monarch too much. However, the Era flag's changes to the laws were completely different. The change to the Era flag was a change to the overall situation. It wasn't a change to the specific rules or laws. The ultimate result of the Era flag was to cause a change in the laws. But that was a natural change because of the results required by the banner of an era. Just like the void at this moment, the era flag only changed the result of talisman cultivators not being able to exert any power in this void. The changes of the other laws were naturally due to the existence of this result. It was even possible to see how much the specific rules had changed. Even Luo Fan had no idea how it had changed. It was precisely because of this direct change that the Talisman King was unable to react in time. The laws of the void took effect on him, and he was unable to exert any of his great sage-to-be cultivation. He was swallowed up by the bright red river. After the bright red river rushed into the Talisman King's body, it rushed out of his back. The Talisman King's body was penetrated by the long river. The aura in his body disappeared completely. All of his life force seemed to have disappeared in an instant. It was as if everything had been taken away by the bright red river. Finally, under the impact of the bright red river, he gradually collapsed. Then, he turned into countless pieces that scattered in all directions and gradually disappeared without a trace. The bright red river meandered in the void and finally formed an extremely mysterious pattern. After the incomparably complicated pattern, it suddenly shrank. It turned back into a bright red flag and floated above Luo Fan's head. Although there was no wind, it still fluttered naturally. The restored bright red flag was no longer the same as before. There was now a figure on the flag. It was a 4-tiered altar. The figure and the altar looked exactly like the Talisman King and his altar. At this moment, the figure and the altar were not inanimate objects within the flag. Instead, they seemed to be fighting in another world. They were constantly struggling and releasing countless runes, forming all kinds of strange things. They seemed to be resisting and attacking something. That figure was none other than the Talisman King's spirit. That altar was also the Talisman King's altar. Looking at the flag of the era, Luo Fan let out a long sigh, and the look on his face became relaxed. The outcome has been decided. Now let's see how long he can last. Such a thought flashed through his mind. The Talisman King's spirit was currently in an illusory world. There were countless powerful life forms in this illusory world. These powerful life forms had not evolved out of thin air. They were the appearances of the various powerful life forms that Luo Fan had encountered in the process of traversing the more than 9,000 checkpoints on the path of transcendence. Of course, they were not limited to the strength that Luo Fan had encountered back then. Instead, they had all been raised by Luo Fan to the same strength as his own cultivation realm. That was the limit of what he could raise to the same strength as his own cultivation realm. The era flag had endless wondrous uses, but after all, what Luo Fan had comprehended was only an insignificant trace. It could not compare to the true trend of the era. After creating a life form, it could not give it strength that surpassed its own. However, even if it was only at the same cultivation realm as Luo Fan, the Talisman King that had been absorbed into the era flag was still only a spirit. The altar's power was greatly reduced because it had lost its physical body. Although it was still slightly stronger than him, it no longer had an overwhelming advantage. Under such circumstances, countless life forms that were at the same cultivation realm as Luo Fan attacked him. Although there would definitely be unimaginable losses, the outcome would definitely be to Luo Fan's satisfaction. Because of this, Luo Fan dared to think that the outcome was already decided. At this moment, the Talisman King's heart was filled with endless anger. What he saw was a world, a boundless universe. Numerous stars adorned the boundless darkness. They were faintly discernible, emitting all sorts of light. The surrounding Yuan Shi was quite rich, and it could almost be called a holy land for cultivation. But there was an indescribably tough brand within the Yuan Shi. This strange brand made the Yuan Shi seem like it was alive. It completely rejected his existence. Not to mention being absorbed, even the Talisman King would receive a strong impact when he came into contact with the Yuan Shi. It was as if the Yuan Shi was constantly attacking him. If that was all, the Talisman King could still endure. Although the brand was extremely tough, it would only be a little troublesome for him to destroy and refine it with his cultivation realm. What made him feel unbearable was that he was only in the form of a spirit at this moment. It was his altar. It was only an illusory image. Although it could still unleash quite a bit of power, it was so weak compared to the power it originally possessed, causing him to feel extremely irritated. Again, the Talisman King roared. Countless talismans surged out of the altar and formed a huge fist in the void. It suddenly punched toward a certain place in the void. The moment the fist formed from talismans punched out, a huge fist that seemed to be tens of thousands of miles in diameter tore through the air. It seemed to transcend time and suddenly appeared in the void, blasting towards the Talisman King. This fist shone with golden light and exuded boundless divine power. As soon as it appeared, endless majesty and holiness filled the void of the universe. When the two fists came into contact, the entire universe seemed to shake violently at this moment. It seemed like many spots of light that represented stars were extinguished. A blood-curdling scream came from an unknown distance away, followed by a sound that pierced through the air. The fist that was tens of thousands of miles in diameter suddenly collapsed, turning into endless divine power that rushed in all directions. The gigantic fist shattered. The Talisman King's talisman fist wasn't any better. The talismans that formed the fist spewed out in all directions. Although it didn't make the fist collapse and disappear, it turned the fist into a transparent shadow. Although it barely maintained the appearance of a fist, anyone who saw it could tell how much damage it had suffered. The Talisman King frowned deeply. He raised his hand and recalled the fist. It spun and madly absorbed the scattered talismans around it. In this universe where Origin Chi deeply rejected him, any power he had was precious. At this moment, countless pitch-black objects tore through the air. They were so fast that they had already reached his side the moment he sensed their existence. The startled Talisman King spread out the talisman fist and transformed it into a huge hand that covered his body. Those pitch-black objects, each of which was the size of a person, directly collided with the talisman hand. Loud rumbles filled the void. The noise was so loud that even the Talisman King felt deafened and tinnitus. Of course, at this moment, he was not in the mood to pay attention to his deafened and tinnitus. This was because the loud noise was accompanied by an extremely powerful impact. When the impact acted on the talisman hand, it directly collapsed. Then, the talisman hand wrapped in the collapsed talismans and blasted towards the Talisman King's body from all directions. The Talisman King gritted his teeth. His body trembled, and the altar phantom directly fused with his body. An armor that could completely cover his body instantly appeared on his body. The impact of the shattered talismans on the armor caused the void around the armor to collapse and turn into smoke that rushed towards the armor. However, the armor didn't shake in the slightest. It even gradually emitted a faint, mysterious light, making the Talisman King look like an ancient god. Sensing something, the Talisman King raised his head and looked at a certain spot in the void. He saw a large number of huge humanoid objects appear in the void. These humanoid objects looked like robots. They all looked different, but the parts on their bodies were like fine mechanical parts. When combined, they looked like a large sea of machines. Silicon-based life forms. How do I know they're silicon-based life forms? When the Talisman King saw these humanoid objects, a familiar feeling suddenly emerged in his mind, and he instantly spat out the words silicon-based life forms. Then, he quickly felt surprised, not knowing how he knew that they were silicon-based life forms. Luo Fan, who was outside the era flag, saw everything. When he heard the Talisman King's words, he was even more convinced that this person was a perfected quasi-saint. Otherwise, the Talisman King would simply be a talisman cultivator born and raised on an ordinary cultivation planet. How could he know about silicon-based life forms that only existed in other eras? Each of those silicon-based life forms had the strength of a perfected Dao integration realm expert, and they cooperated very well. After they appeared, they used their own special attacks and combined them. They unleashed power that was far beyond their original strength. They directly blasted towards the Talisman King. Such an attack left the Talisman King with no time to think about how he could instinctively know what the life forms in front of him were. With a frantic leap, he crossed the void that was several light years away. He arrived in another starry sky. This universe was an illusory universe in the flag of the era. However, there were specific laws and laws in it. Since there were laws and laws, it was not impossible to comprehend them. After all, the Talisman King was a great accomplishment quasi-sage. Even though Luo Fan's various techniques have been weakened by many times, it was not difficult for him to analyze the nomological laws of such a universe and obtain the ability to shift through the void. However, the Talisman King had rich combat experience. Although he had shifted through the void and the space before him became empty, he did not let down his guard at all. Instead, he raised his hand and waved. Countless talismans condensed into a mirror in front of him. This mirror was only 3 feet in diameter. After it appeared, it floated above his head and emitted a brilliance that stretched and shrank. It seemed to be accumulating power in preparation. At that moment, the void shattered and the countless attacks launched by the silicon-based life forms pierced through the void and continued pouncing towards the Talisman King. In the blink of an eye, they had already arrived in front of the Talisman King. They were about to collide with the Talisman King. At that instant, the brilliance emitted by the mirror above the Talisman King's head changed. Like a net, the countless attacks were sucked into it. After that, the countless attacks disappeared without a trace, as though they had never appeared in the first place. However, after doing all this, the Talisman Monarch's face turned slightly pale. Clearly, this seemingly easy and pleasant action of swallowing was not a simple task for the Talisman Monarch. However, it was not without a price. Right at this moment, the void kept on shattering, and countless silicon-based life forms tore through the air, forming a sphere that densely surrounded the Talisman Monarch. The Talisman King's expression became increasingly solemn. The mirror above his head trembled, and countless attacks were fired from it, transforming into a sphere that blasted towards the surrounding silicon-based life forms. These attacks were the same attacks that the countless silicon-based life forms had blasted out earlier. Those silicon-based life forms had perfected Dao integration strength similar to Luo Fan's. Although they could not compare to the Talisman King, they were still rather powerful. The countless attacks blasted out directly destroyed more than half of the attacks reflected by the mirror. Clearly, there was still a small portion that was not destroyed and fell into the group of silicon-based life forms. In an instant, a small portion of the silicon-based life forms was destroyed, causing gaps to appear in the spherical encirclement. After doing all this, the Talisman King's face turned even paler. Just as he was about to teleport away, an indescribable force suddenly locked onto him. The void that he blasted out earlier distorted, and countless strange life forms appeared there. After these life forms appeared, they distorted slightly and changed slightly, turning into countless Talisman Kings in an instant. Every single one of them had a sneer on their face as they looked at him with a malicious expression. In an instant, an indescribable sense of familiarity welled up in the Talisman King's mind, and he could not help but say, "This is the sixth absolute demon race." However, he no longer had any intention of investigating this, and he only felt a sense of despair. Let me see how long you can last. Outside the era flag, Luo Fan hovered in the void with an indifferent expression on his face, and this thought flashed through his mind. But who exactly are you? Even if you're a true great perfection quasi-saint, it's still normal for you to know about silicon-based life forms, but to know about the sixth absolute demon race. Then, this question appeared in his mind again. However, this question was not enough to change his decision, and he would not release the Talisman King because of this question. Instead, he activated the era flag's power even more, and more life forms appeared to besiege the Talisman King. Silicon-based life forms, six absolute demon race, sages, giant gods, faith gods, rock life forms, metal life forms, and so on. Almost all of the life forms that Luo Fan encountered were strengthened to the limit, and they were all thrown into attacking the Talisman King. Even though the Talisman King was not injured at all, it was difficult for him to remain unscathed in the face of this endless barrage of attacks. Furthermore, he was only left with his spirit soul. Although he dealt with every attack that came his way and continued to destroy all of the life forms that besieged him, the injuries that he sustained continued to worsen. In the end, 3 years later, a shrill roar rang out from within the era flag, and the entire space and the entire dream realm trembled. Then, everything began to crumble and crumble into nothingness. Chapter 9:47. The Charm King was the incarnation of the great perfection sage-to-be who had created the dream world. During the 3 years he had been in the era flag, his real memory began to recover as time went by. He grew at a speed that shocked Luo Fan. Soon, he had surpassed the limits of the charm cultivation. The power of his divine sense became stronger and stronger. In the end, he was thousands of times stronger than before. However, no matter how strong he was, his fate was sealed the moment he was taken into the era flag. No matter how strong he was, the only difference would be the amount of time he could sustain it. In the end, the Talisman Monarch only lasted for 3 years in the atmosphere of that era. During these 3 years, he was attacked by countless living beings at the Dao Integration Exceptional Realm all the time. In the end, the Charm King failed completely. If it weren't for the fact that he was in his dream, and when he was obliterated to the point where only a trace of his essence was left, he would wake up, destroy the dream, and return to reality. Otherwise, he might have even lost his life in that era's flag. After the destruction of the world, the area where Luo Fan was located had already become a void of nothingness. It was exactly the same as the place where he had been after passing through the 9,991st stage. Luo Fan let out a long breath and smiled bitterly. Sure enough, it's much more difficult to break through the transcendent realm than all the previous breakthroughs. It's a pity that I only managed to break through a small realm in this dream world. Such a thought appeared in his mind. However, he also knew that this was inevitable. Moreover, he could even guess that his progress in the following levels would almost stagnate. He might not even be able to break through a small realm. The reason was very simple. If he could break through every single stage, then wouldn't he be able to break through 7 small realms in the remaining 7 stages? Directly become a Tao Master of the minor accomplishment? Wouldn't this path become the Tao Master path? Although he was looking forward to it, he knew that it was almost impossible even in his dreams. It was not easy to become a Tao Master. Even if the Almighty behind this path was a supreme saint, it would be impossible. It was unlikely that a living being could be promoted to the Tao Master realm in just a few levels. If that was the case, why would they need to set up the previous 9,000 checkpoints? Since he had guessed this, he understood that what he needed to do next was to try his best to comprehend the secrets of transcendence within the next 7 levels. Those who achieve transcendence would complete this path of transcendence. Of course, if it was possible, it would be a good choice to go further in the transcendent realm. A thought flashed through his mind. An impassioned music was produced from an unknown source and poured directly into his ears. Subsequently, the world before his eyes underwent a tremendous upheaval, but it was extremely natural, causing him to be unable to sense any traces of human intervention, nor could he sense any sudden changes. An incomparably vast world formed in front of him. In this world, the sky was round and the earth was boundless. The sky was blood-red, and the earth was boundless. Waves of iron-blooded aura filled the world, causing Luo Fan to feel as if the blood in his body was circulating much faster. Indistinctly, an invisible fighting spirit was born out of thin air. This is the 9,993rd level, the way to pass the dream realm of a profound sage-to-be. Find the owner of the dream realm and defeat him. At the same time, such a voice rang in Luo Fan's ears. Sure enough, it's the dream realm of a profound sage-to-be. Luo Fan frowned slightly, feeling a headache coming on. Naturally, his headache was not because of the dream realm of a profound sage-to-be. It was because the dream realm of a profound sage-to-be was really troublesome. Just by sensing the laws of this dream realm and the various auras in this dream realm, he knew that a profound sage-to-be had an extremely strong fighting spirit. This kind of fighting spirit was so strong that even in his dreams, he would dream of such a huge battlefield. Such a profound sage-to-be was the most difficult kind to deal with. If he wanted to defeat such a great perfection quasi-sage, it would be hundreds of times more difficult than defeating the Talisman King. Knowing this, Luo Fan, who had to defeat a profound sage-to-be to pass this level, could not help but feel a headache coming on. When the entire world was completely constructed, the passionate music also gradually faded away. It was equivalent to the moment Luo Fan completely entered this dream world. A kind of supreme and bizarre existence suddenly took effect on his body. This existence surpassed the level of the laws and even the great Tao. It directly reached the level of the basic pillars of the dream realm. Since Luo Fan had not transcended, he could not be immune to such a basic existence and would definitely be affected. He could not use his own magic power to get rid of its influence like how he dealt with the laws. Under the influence of this supreme existence, Luo Fan suddenly felt his body, his power, his will, his spirit, and everything else weakening at an unimaginable speed. This speed of weakening was so fast that it felt like the entire world was being constructed. He could not feel any abruptness at all, and could not even think of resisting before the weakening ended. After the final transformation, everything about Luo Fan had weakened to a billionth of what it had originally been. At this moment, he was only equivalent to an existence that was dozens of times stronger than ordinary people. Any living being that had achieved the immortal Tao could casually crush such an existence with a flick of their hands. This feeling of losing power made Luo Fan's mind instantly become irritated. However, even though he'd lost a great deal of strength, his cultivation of the Tao heart still existed after all. This kind of irritation that was sufficient to make an ordinary cultivator go crazy and ultimately destroy themselves hysterically only lasted for an instant in his mind before it was completely suppressed by him and vanished without a trace. Right at this moment, a light shout resounded by his ear. He looked over and saw that countless living beings had unknowingly appeared around him. These living beings were of different heights. There were males and females, and some even looked strange. Some did not even look like humans. However, the auras that each of them gave off, they were all on the same level. In other words, they were on the same level as the power that Luo Fan currently possessed. At that moment, Luo Fan had an inexplicable realization. Perhaps this is the limit of a person's body in this world. Although the shout wasn't loud, it wasn't loud. However, the billions of living beings present heard it at the same time. It did not affect them at all, and they could not even find the source of the shout. This change caused the countless living beings who were originally conversing to fall silent. Following this, a deep and sonorous voice rang out. Similarly, the source of the voice was unknown, but it directly entered everyone's ears. The blood war this time is about to begin. The rules for this blood war are the same as before. Every 100 million people will be assigned a battlefield. What you need to do is to survive the 100-year blood war. In the end, only 10 people can survive in each battlefield. Try your best to become one of the last 10. I hope I can see you again in 100 years. As he spoke, an indescribable power swept past countless living beings. Wherever that power swept past, those living beings all disappeared. Clearly, they had been teleported to some battlefield. Luo Fan was quite far away from the place where that power had swept past, but he had time to see many things. When that power swept past, he discovered that those living beings did not feel any fear at all. In fact, they did not even reject the fact that only 10 out of 100 million people could survive. It was as if they were already used to it and were even looking forward to it. Although Luo Fan's body, spirit, power, willpower, and so on had been weakened by countless times and had become only dozens of times stronger than ordinary people, he was still a powerful being at the perfected Tao integration stage after all. His insight and knowledge were definitely not something that ordinary living beings could compare to. After a brief look, he knew that this power was a kind of teleportation power. He could also vaguely sense where this power was going to teleport these living beings. Just as he obtained all this information, the power directly swept through his body. In an instant, the void changed. When everything stabilized, he found himself alone in a wilderness. The surroundings were silent, and there was no one at all. There were only many strange flowers, plants, and trees. It seems that this battlefield is quite big. As Luo Fan thought about this, he found a big tree, jumped up, and sat cross-legged in the dense foliage. There's actually some more information. It seems that power poured him before. After searching for a while, he found some new information in his mind. This information was not generated by himself or thought out by himself. Instead, it had appeared out of thin air at some point. Clearly, the only thing that could do that was the power that had just swept past his body and transported him from an unknown place to this huge battlefield. There was nothing too mysterious about this information. It only described the rules of this battle and the benefits that could be obtained in the end. Just as that strange voice had said, this battle would last for 100 years and take place among 100 million people. In the end, there would definitely be only 10 people left. If there were only 10 people left, then even if it was less than 100 years, the battle would end and the survivors would leave the battlefield. If there were still more than 10 people left after 100 years, then the remaining people would be randomly eliminated and the number of survivors would reach 10. The reason why such a cruel battle existed and was welcomed by countless people was because the living beings that survived would have the opportunity to break through their limits and obtain immortality. They would then be qualified to pursue higher levels of power. I see. No wonder. After understanding the final benefits of this battle, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. As long as one was a living being, even if it was in this dreamscape, the pursuit of life was an inextinguishable instinct. For the sake of immortality, even if the battle was 10,000 times more cruel, there would still be countless living beings that would flock to it. Moreover, the victors would obtain higher levels of power and break through their limits. Naturally, this would be even more attractive to many living beings. This dreamscape is a world where battles are the most important. The great completion quasi-sage is either already standing at the peak or has joined the battle and become a living being that improves extremely quickly. It seems that as long as I continue to win, no matter what kind of situation he is in, I will definitely be able to meet him in the end. Luo Fan's thoughts turned, and such a thought flashed through his mind. In an instant, he had already decided on his next course of action. After deciding on what to do, he began to toss it aside. He carefully sensed his own body and his own strength. Although everything was limited to an unknown fraction of what it used to be, Luo Fan's foundation was still there. He could not be as useless as ordinary living beings. Through his senses, he discovered that there were no signs of him being suppressed at all. It was as if he was born weak. It was as if he had never cultivated to a higher realm and possessed greater power. This feeling caused his eyes to light up involuntarily. This was not because he was a masochist, but because he discovered that the mysteries of this oppression were beyond his imagination. If he could figure out this oppression, he might comprehend many mysteries that he had never comprehended before. Of course, if he could surpass this suppression, he might comprehend the mysteries of the transcendent realm and break through the limits of the perfected Tao integration realm. It was also possible for him to reach the transcendent realm. With such mysteries, he could not help but feel his eyes light up. This was almost like the path to transcendent realm was right in front of him. Even if this path was full of thorns, it was still countless times better than having no path at all. After using his senses to scan his body tens of thousands of times, Luo Fan ultimately did not sense anything abnormal. If it was not for his firm willpower, he would have suspected that he was not being suppressed at all, let alone sensing the mysteries of this suppression. The feeling that he had been powerful for countless years was just an illusion. In the end, I still have to rely on you. Luo Fan sighed. A faint bright red spot dyed his mind. This was because his power was completely suppressed. The era flag was a combination of powers, but it was also suppressed at the same time and could not move at all, not to mention revealing its might. Because of this, Luo Fan could not directly display the era flag like he had with the Talisman King. Instead, he could only call out his understanding of the mysteries of the era tide. He used this mystery in the most primitive way. When the bright red light covered Luo Fan's mind, he felt an indescribable suppression. This suppression appeared in Luo Fan's mind. This suppression came from all over his body, from his spirit, from his willpower, from his everything, and even from the entire world and space-time in the outside world. This kind of oppressive feeling made people feel irritated, and it was almost unbearable. However, Luo Fan did not feel irritated at all. Instead, he heaved a sigh of relief, and an indescribable joy appeared on his face. Because he knew that this oppressive feeling represented that the entire dreamscape was suppressing him. Feeling this suppression meant that the incomparably mysterious suppression was no longer untraceable to him. It meant that he had a chance to break through this suppression and comprehend some of the mysteries that he needed and were of utmost importance to him. Under such circumstances, he could not help but feel happy. With the help of his mind that had been dyed bright red, he vaguely sensed that there was a vast power, a vast willpower, and a vast spirit that belonged to him in another mysterious space-time. However, he could only sense it. When he wanted to mobilize these powers, he discovered that the indescribable suppression directly blocked him, making it impossible for him to succeed. As expected, sensing this change, Luo Fan was not surprised. The dreamscape suppression on him had reached an inconceivable level. How could it be so easy for him to successfully break through? It was already an unexpected gain to be able to sense the various existences that belonged to him. How could he hope to successfully mobilize them? After giving up on mobilizing his powers, Luo Fan began to carefully sense his body. A faint bright red gradually spread all over his body, dyeing him into a bright red silhouette. This kind of bright red light was extremely faint. Even if one's eyesight was strong, they would easily miss this kind of bright red if they were not careful. Luo Fan currently had the advantage of being on top of a large tree. There were dense branches and leaves around him, so even though he was bright red all over, he was still very well hidden and would not be easily discovered by others. This bright red light was the mysteries of the times, and its power was extremely shocking. As he was immersed in it, Luo Fan could faintly feel a huge shackle weighing down on his body. This shackle was already extremely tough, and it made one feel like it could not be broken at a glance. However, what made Luo Fan feel even more troubled was that the shackles themselves were compatible with the entire dream world. Faintly, he could even feel the various auras of the dream world from shackles. At this moment, when his own power slightly collided with the shackles, the rebounding power made him feel as if he was being crushed by the entire world. Fortunately, his control over his power was superb, and he dispersed this power in time. Otherwise, he would not die just like that, but he would definitely suffer extremely serious injuries. Evidently, if he wanted to use force to break through this shackle, he would have to destroy the entire dream realm at the same time. Chapter 948. With that thought in mind, Luo Fan stopped probing the shackles. Instead, he began to circulate the power in his body, which was only a few billionths of a percent of his remaining power, allowing this power to circulate all over his body. Although this power was only a few billionths of his own power, it was dozens of times stronger than the power of ordinary living beings. In terms of absolute power, it was also quite impressive. Just like how there were strong and weak people among ordinary people, and some people could even fight against 100 people with the same amount of strength, the same amount of strength could unleash a world of difference when used in different ways. If this power that was dozens of times stronger than ordinary living beings was exerted roughly, it would only be dozens of times stronger than ordinary living beings. However, if some exquisite techniques were used to utilize this power to exert the power of this power, it was possible that the power that could be exerted would be thousands of times stronger than ordinary living beings. Luo Fan was a powerful existence at the perfected Tao integration realm. Although his cultivation realm had been suppressed, his knowledge was still there, and the countless mysterious techniques in his memory were not damaged at all. Under such circumstances, it was naturally easy for him to find a technique to make the power of this power surpass the limit. He did not even need to think much before he could naturally find it. Under his control, the power in his body began to circulate in an extremely mysterious and complicated trajectory inside his body. A strange pattern gradually appeared behind him as it circulated. This pattern was like a large flag with a faint bright red color. When it appeared, an aura that surpassed the limit flowed wantonly. This large flag was formed by the many powers that Luo Fan had condensed. It was a power combination that could best exert the mysterious power of the time's tide. Of course, what appeared behind Luo Fan was only a phantom image of this combination. It was just a kind of intent. It could not even appear slightly more real, let alone truly take shape. After all, although the power combination required by the time's tide was not insignificant for Luo Fan, who was at the perfected Tao integration realm, it was not much either. However, the power required was still too much for Luo Fan, whose power was only dozens of times that of an ordinary person. It was so much that even if he completely burned his life to ashes, he would not be able to reach 1/10,000th of the requirement. Under such circumstances, how could he condense the Times Tide flag again? Being able to condense the phantom image of the Times Tide flag behind him was already a privilege that belonged to the creator of this power combination. At this moment, the way the power in his body was in line with the Times Tide flag's power combination. Luo Fan was the creator of the power combination of the era flag. Changing this power combination into a form and turning it into a cultivation method was naturally an extremely simple matter for him. Due to this method, although the total power in his body did not increase at all, its nature had undergone all sorts of extremely mysterious changes. These changes caused the might of this power to become stronger and stronger. At the same time, his body gradually emitted a faint, bright red luster. It was as if it had already carried traces of the mysteries of the Times Tide. Although this method was created by Luo Fan in a hurry, it was created according to the Times Tide flag's power combination after all. During the process of using it, the mysteries of the Times Tide that he had comprehended would naturally be added to his power, allowing his power to possess all sorts of powers that it could not have previously. Thus, the power of the power would increase greatly even though the quantity did not increase. In fact, if this method was cultivated by other cultivators, it would be an extremely exquisite and mysterious method. Even a cultivator who had no understanding of the mysteries of the Tide of the Times would eventually grasp a little bit of the mysteries of the Tide of the Times by cultivating this cultivation method. Of course, this kind of mastery was at most in the form of mastery like Yin Qing Sheng, and the amount of mastery could only reach 1/10,000th of what Luo Fan had mastered at most. Even so, such a method was much more powerful than most cultivation methods. Luo Fan stayed on this tree for 10 years. During these 10 years, some living beings would pass by the area he was at for time. There were even a few times when some living beings passed by the tree he was at. However, regardless of whether they passed by occasionally or treated this place as a battlefield, none of them discovered Luo Fan's existence. Even if their vision was extremely perfect and they only needed to raise their heads to discover Luo Fan, it was the same. The reason for this was very simple. It was because the cultivation method that Luo Fan used had changed his power, which in turn changed his body. It gave his body some mysteries of the Times Tide profundity, and as long as he was unwilling, he would not be discovered by others. Of course, this kind of power had a limit. If one was stronger than him to a certain extent, they would naturally be immune to the effects of this power and discover his existence. However, it was clear that the creatures that were thrown into this battlefield were all equal in strength. They were only dozens of times stronger than ordinary creatures. In this kind of situation, even if Luo Fan did not cultivate, it would be impossible for them to suppress Luo Fan in terms of strength. How could they possess a strength that surpassed the sail to a certain extent? One day after 10 years, Luo Fan let out a long breath. His body trembled, and the image of the flag that had been floating behind him for 10 years trembled slightly. Then, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared before. However, his body carried a strange aura of control, as if everything in the world and all living beings in the universe were under his control. Even though he was sitting cross-legged on the tree branch, it was as if he was sitting on a supreme throne. I've finally succeeded in completely converting it. This speed is truly as slow as a snail. A faint bitter smile appeared on Luo Fan's face as such a thought flashed through his mind. If it was before, even if he were to completely transform the power that was trillions of times stronger than it was now into another type of power, it would only take a few days. This time, he'd spent an entire 10 years before he'd successfully converted an unknown fraction of the energy. This speed was truly too horrible to look at, and he couldn't help but feel helpless. With a thought, his body spread out, and he landed lightly on the ground. That kind of posture was free and elegant, as if he was still a supreme Tao integration cultivator. At this moment, the power circulating in his body had already completely turned into a bright red and illusory power. this kind of power was faintly discernible. At first glance, it seemed to be incomparably thick, incomparably pure, and incomparably condensed. However, upon closer inspection, it seemed like it did not exist at all, and it was just a kind of illusory image. This power circulated endlessly in his body, and it actually formed its own body and grew as it was consumed. It actually made this power that was only dozens of times stronger than an ordinary person possess the characteristics that only a connate zenith heaven cultivator possessed. This characteristic caused his body to be filled with power at all times, and it strengthened his ability to continue fighting to an almost limitless level. Apart from that, because of the change in the nature of this power, Luo Fan possessed almost all the abilities that a cultivator possessed. In fact, he could even easily possess many abilities that a cultivator could not possess. Although it's still not comparable to when I was at my peak, it's much better than before. Luo Fan thought to himself. With a slight thought, the situation of the entire battlefield was instantly reflected in his mind. This battlefield was only a few million square kilometers. It was not much bigger than Huaxia, where Luo Fan had been in his previous life. To ordinary people, such a battlefield was already extremely huge. Even if 100 million people were to be in it, it would be like a drop of water entering the ocean. However, to the 100 million living beings that each had tens of times the strength of an ordinary person, such a battlefield was extremely narrow. Any living being could easily find the existence of other living beings, and from there, a battle would erupt. Ever since Luo Fan stepped into this battlefield, 10 years had passed. During these 10 years, the entire battlefield was practically breaking out at every moment. Among the 100 million living beings, almost everyone except Luo Fan had encountered more than one battle. The number of living beings had long been reduced from the original 100 million to around 90 million. In just a short 10 years, it had already decreased by nearly 10 million. At this moment, Luo Fan was not using his own perception. His current perception was only a few dozen times that of an ordinary person, and the range of his perception was even limited to a radius of several hundred feet. How could he rely on this perception to grasp the battlefield that was a few million square kilometers? The ability that he relied on to sense the entire battlefield was an ability that was similar to intuition. This ability could not be specifically defined by any physical existence at all. It was not some perception, nor was it something like waves. It was just a simple ability. There was almost no logic to it. In other words, if he wanted to know, he would know everything. This ability came from the bright red power in his body. With another thought, Luo Fan even had a complete understanding of the positions of all the living beings in the entire battlefield, their abilities, and even the various battles that had taken place in the past 10 years. All of these details were vivid in his eyes, like a holographic image, and he did not miss anything. If it weren't for me, the ones who might have been left in the end would definitely not be more than these 100 people. After seeing through all of this, Luo Fan selected 100 living beings from the 9,000 or so living beings and secretly weighed them. These 100 beings were all people with firm beliefs and were extremely intelligent. Although the power they possessed was not much different from that of other living beings, with their firm beliefs and wisdom, they could unleash power that far exceeded the limits of their power. This would allow them to defeat their opponents more easily and survive in the end. As for who would most likely survive in the end, although Luo Fan had some guesses, there were too many surprises after all, so he could not be completely sure. Based on this situation, the final result will only be out in about 50 years. I'll wait until the end before I make my move. After some consideration, Luo Fan had already calculated when the battle would end and determined his next move. If he was willing, although there were more than 90 million living beings, he could still kill them all in 2 or 3 years, thus ending this extremely bloody battle. However, if he did that, he would have to kill day and night, which was too troublesome. It was better to wait until the end, when there were only a few living beings left in the end, before making his move. That way, not only would he be able to enjoy a relaxing life for 50 years, but he would also be able to reduce the number of deaths. Why not? With this in mind, Luo Fan did not hesitate and stepped forward. He used ground shrink to move towards a hidden valley that he knew of before. The location of the valley was unique. It was surrounded by mountains on all sides, and there was only a small cave that could be entered. There was even thick clouds above, making it an extremely rare hiding place. The ability to ground shrinking was also brought about by the power that had changed in his body. Although there were similar abilities in the dream world, none of them were as natural and unique as this ability. As a result, even though he encountered hundreds of living beings along the way, none of them discovered his tracks. He arrived at the valley with great ease. The scenery of the valley was very beautiful. If an ordinary person came here, even an emperor who controlled an empire would have the thought of living in seclusion for the rest of their lives. After arriving here, Luo Fan casually grabbed at the ground, and a hidden castle rose up. It looked no different from the ground, but it was very clean, comfortable, and sturdy. There were even many mechanical puppets in the castle, cleaning and serving people. Since he had to stay here for 50 years, and all he had to do was wait, Luo Fan naturally did his best to live a better life and relax himself. 54 years had passed since Luo Fan had lived in such a valley. During these 54 years, he lived extremely leisurely. He did not seem like a living being that had been thrown into a bloody battlefield at all. Instead, he seemed like an otherworldly expert living in seclusion in a valley. Occasionally, he would temper his own strength and comprehend the suppression that was placed on him by the entire dreamscape. Occasionally, he would comprehend the situation of the entire battlefield and sense the situation of the remaining living beings on the battlefield. Among the 90 million people, even if they were all ordinary people, there would definitely be many peerless geniuses among them, who could do countless things that ordinary people could not. Moreover, these 90 million people were all powerhouses that were dozens of times stronger than ordinary people. During these 54 years, no matter how well hidden the living beings were, they were all found. Among the 90 million living beings, only 23 people were left. These 23 people were divided into 4 teams. The largest team had 10 people, one team had 5 people, and 2 teams had 4 people. These 4 teams were currently facing off in a place that was extremely far away from the valley where Luo Fan was. When he sensed the situation, Luo Fan knew that it was time for him to make a move. With a single thought, he walked out of the valley. Everything in the valley collapsed with a loud bang as he left. The entire valley was completely destroyed, and the mountains behind him collapsed at the same time, filling up the valley completely. Although moving mountains and overturning seas was not easy for Luo Fan at this time, it was not impossible for him to do it. He had stayed in this valley for more than 50 years, so he was extremely familiar with everything here. Originally, the difficult task of collapsing the mountains was extremely easy for him, so he naturally completed it in a few moves. Among the 4 teams, there were also people with strong perceptive abilities. Otherwise, they would not have been able to find everyone except for Luo Fan and kill them. The moment the mountains collapsed, they all sensed something. For a moment, the teams discussed and decided to stop for the time being. They wanted to see what caused the mountains to collapse, whether it was a powerful living being or whether it was a powerful team. Since they could survive until the end among the 100 million living beings with similar strength, they were naturally not fools. They all knew when to stand against each other and when to cooperate. When they were wiping out the living beings, they had searched the entire battlefield countless times. They had naturally been to the valley where Luo Fan had left, but they did not find any abnormalities there. At this moment, the abnormality had happened. There was only one possibility. The source of this abnormality had the ability to deceive their senses. In other words, it was very likely that the source was stronger than them. This was the case regardless of whether it was a team or an individual. In this case, it was obvious that they could only choose to cooperate. Although they had decided to cooperate, they did not stop confronting each other, nor did they go to the place where the mountains collapsed. Instead, they continued to wait there. It was just that the atmosphere of confrontation had become much less tense. That place was extremely far from the place where the mountains collapsed. Anyway, the person who caused the abnormality would definitely come to contact them. So why should they rush to deal with it by fighting tiredly instead of choosing to wait at ease? Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about this at all. He unhurriedly moved toward the place where the teams were confronting each other with the ability to shrink the ground into an inch. Because he wasn't in a hurry, it took him half a day to complete a journey that would normally take him 2 to 4 hours if he traveled at full speed. When Luo Fan's leisurely figure appeared in the eyes of the teams, they all became solemn and raised their vigilance to the highest level. Chapter 949. Compared to Luo Fan's ability, their perception simply didn't have any redeeming qualities. Even if Luo Fan had the slightest intention to conceal himself, they wouldn't be able to sense him. Therefore, before they saw Luo Fan with their own eyes, they could at most sense that a huge threat was coming towards them. They could not be sure whether it was a specific living being or a huge team. When Luo Fan appeared in front of them, they realized that the existence that could destroy a mountain and make them feel a huge threat was actually just a living being. He was just an ordinary person who looked thinner and weaker than almost everyone else in the group. Such a discovery did not make them feel at ease. Instead, it made them raise their already extremely high vigilance to another level. How could these people, who could survive the battle of hundreds of millions of people, be stupid? They naturally understood that the more unfathomable something was, the more dangerous it was. Luo Fan looked at these teams and said calmly, "In the end, only 10 people can stay on this battlefield. Therefore, only 9 of you can survive. I can't just leave a portion of the members of a certain team behind to hate me. So, I'll leave both your teams behind." As he spoke, Luo Fan pointed at a team of 5 people and a team of 4 people. Among those teams, whether they were pointed at by Luo Fan or not, their expressions changed drastically. Those who were not pointed at were naturally, because Luo Fan's words clearly meant that he wanted to kill them. How could their expressions not change? On the other hand, those who were pointed at were, because of their pride. They did not rejoice at being chosen, but only felt humiliated. The strong had their own pride. Since they could survive until now, they were naturally strong. These teams had been enemies for decades and had long established a deep tacit understanding. There was no need for any words. With just a few glances, they had already determined how to attack Luo Fan. With a loud shout, those teams were divided into 6 waves and rushed towards Luo Fan in an endless stream. The light and shadow effects of these attacks were extremely gorgeous, and the attack effects were also extremely shocking. It was not something that ordinary people could achieve with power that was dozens of times stronger. Clearly, these living beings that could survive until the end were all existences that could unleash power that surpassed the limits of their bodies. Although they were not as amazing as Luo Fan, they could easily fight 100 people alone. In the face of this incomparably tacit cooperation that had obviously surpassed the limit, and the attack that had greatly increased its power, Luo Fan just smiled, raised his hand, and all the attacks that were attacking him collapsed. The 23 people were instantly frozen in place. Regardless of whether they were leaping into the air or charging forward on the ground, they were all frozen like statues. If they were able to exert 100% of their power, then Luo Fan could exert millions or even tens of millions of power. Such a utilization rate of power was almost 10,000 times, or even hundreds of thousands of times, under the condition that their own power was the same. With such a difference in power, they were naturally like ants in front of Luo Fan. This kind of thing was naturally extremely easy for them. The 23 people were horrified, but before they could say anything, a voice suddenly rang out. Luo Fan raised his hand and pressed down lightly. Among the 23 people, other than the 9 people he had chosen before, the other dozen people all withered on the ground. All their vitality disappeared in an instant, and they directly turned into dozens of corpses. The moment the dozen people died, there was a sudden rumble of thunder in the sky. These sounds came one after another, and the continuous sound shook the entire battlefield. It made the remaining survivors feel shocked, and an indescribable fear arose in their hearts. They involuntarily felt a kind of reverence towards the forces behind this battlefield. Of course, among them, Luo Fan naturally would not be like this. He did not miss a single thing about the changes in the sky, and he even knew countless ways to increase this kind of power to an even more terrifying level. Under such circumstances, how could he feel fear because of this? In fact, there was even a hint of disdain in the depths of his eyes. He despised the shallowness of the methods of the forces behind this. The rumble of thunder lasted for a full 15 minutes, and then an indescribably powerful force brushed past them. In an instant, the void changed, and in Luo Fan's senses, they passed through layers of space-time barriers, directly leaving the battlefield of millions of square kilometers and directly appeared on a huge square. At this moment, there were already thousands of people on the square. These thousands of people all had a murderous aura on them, and it was obvious that they had experienced countless killings. The moment Luo Fan and the others appeared, most of the thousands of people looked at them, as if they were weighing something. After a while, they retracted their gazes. I didn't expect there to be so many battlefields. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but feel a little surprised. The thousands of people in front of him were clearly the experts who had survived from the battlefield of hundreds of millions of people. There were thousands of people, which meant that there were hundreds of battlefields, and tens of billions of living beings had survived. And now, the battlefield of hundreds of millions of people had only lasted for a short 60 years, which was only half of it. Clearly, only a small portion of the battlefields had ended in such a short period of time. This meant that there were still many more living beings still fighting on the battlefields. Perhaps there were tens of billions, hundreds of billions, or even trillions from this. One could imagine how shocking the scale of the battle was. As Luo Fan thought about this, an invisible wave swept past his body, and the information was directly transmitted into his mind. Wait here until the 100-year deadline arrives. After that, the second round of battles will begin. Now, your potential has increased by 10 times. Work hard to make full use of this increased potential during this period. The second round of battles will be even more brutal. This was the information that the wave transmitted into his mind. Increased potential? After completely understanding this information, Luo Fan could not help but be slightly stunned. Borrowing the profundity of the tide of the times, he sensed his entire body. Faintly, he discovered that the huge shackles on his body had loosened a little. This loosening was not much, but it allowed him to recover a little of the power that had been restricted in his body. It was enough to increase the power, spirit, perception, and so on that he possessed by more than 10 times. So this is the method that allows living beings to surpass their limits and obtain the qualifications to pursue immortality. This is quite mysterious. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. The power in his body trembled slightly, and the speed at which it circulated suddenly increased by several times. He felt that the inexplicable existence that had firmly restricted the upper limit of his power had loosened a lot. In just one cycle, he could feel his power increasing. At this moment, the aura on his body was also being suppressed by that inexplicable existence. Even if he released all of it, it would not be too shocking. Therefore, he did not bother to suppress his aura and let his aura grow as his power grew. If it was under normal circumstances, he could directly complete the growth of power that was 10 times stronger than it was now with a single thought. However, it was very obvious that his body, power, perception, and spirit were all insufficient to support the growth rate that he had before. Therefore, he could only use his own power with all his heart, allowing his body, spirit, perception, will, and power to grow step by step, but he could not achieve it in one go. From the information that was transmitted out of thin air, the living beings who had stepped into this square with Luo Fan all knew that it was impossible to attack each other in this square. Once they violated this rule, there would be unpredictable consequences. Of course, it could also be understood as unpredictable punishment. This should have made them feel rather relieved, and they would no longer feel afraid of Luo Fan. However, everything that had happened on the battlefield was like a nightmare to them. It was directly engraved in the depths of their lives, and they could not help but feel fear when they saw a Luo fan. As a result, even though they knew that it was impossible to attack each other in the square, which meant that Luo fan would not attack them, they still could not suppress their fear and stayed far away from Luo fan. In fact, because of a powerful existence like Luo fan, the two groups that originally had a lot of enmity with each other completely abandoned their past enmity and joined forces firmly. It was almost as if they wanted to form a new group. Luo fan naturally did not care about this. He simply stood where he was and stared somewhere in a daze. The power in his body circulated endlessly, and his aura grew stronger with every passing moment. Even though it was countless times slower than his original speed, the rate at which Luo fan's aura grew was still countless times faster than the thousands of people present. The rapid growth of his aura instantly attracted the attention of all the living beings who sensed it. Before they knew it, they had given up a large area around Luo fan. The area that Luo fan was in became one of the several dozen empty areas among the thousands of people present. Evidently, the rate at which Luo fan's aura grew made them acknowledge the fact that Luo fan would become one of the most powerful people. Luo fan's process of regaining his power lasted for 3 years before it ended. After 3 years, the aura on his body had increased by 10 times, which meant that it had reached hundreds of times that of an ordinary person. This also made him one of the strongest among the thousands of people in the plaza. In terms of aura alone, there were people who could match up to him. Even a finger would be more than enough to do so. The thousands of people who saw this speed had grim expressions on their faces, and their wariness towards him was raised to an indescribable limit. For the powerhouses present, even if their potential had increased, it would normally take at least 100 years to truly transform this potential into strength. Even for powerhouses who had cultivated an exquisite technique that could increase their cultivation speed to an unbelievable level, it would take at least 20 to 30 years. Under such circumstances, Luo fan had only spent 3 years to complete the process of breaking through. This was simply a fantasy, and it made them wonder if they had sensed wrongly. If it were not for the fact that they knew that there was absolutely no possibility of anything being wrong with the growth of potential, they would even suspect that Luo fan had already increased his strength a long time ago, or that his potential had increased by more than tenfold. Over the past 3 years, there had been hundreds of powerhouses who had completed the battle against 100 million people and arrived. However, for this incomparably huge square, it was still like a drop of water entering the sea, and it did not make the square feel any more crowded. Based on this speed, it was obvious that the later it was, the more powerhouses who had completed the battle would arrive at the square. In other words, the number of people who had participated in the battle would probably be many times more than what Luo fan had initially expected. It could be a few times, a few dozen times, or even a few hundred times. If one thought about it carefully, this was also normal. The speed at which Luo fan had completed the battle was obviously not slow. If it were not for Luo fan, they would have been delayed for at least a few years. Therefore, there were definitely very, very few battlefields that had completed the battle faster than Luo fan's battlefield. In this way, after the battle in Luo fan's battlefield, the later it was, the more time it would take for the battle in normal battlefields to be completed. In fact, he could even predict that, at the end of the 100 years, there would be even more battlefields that would require random killing to complete the battle. With all these conditions combined, it was easy to imagine how many people would participate in the battle. However, although this method of calculation was reasonable, it was too troublesome. A simpler and more direct calculation method was placed in front of Luo fan. That was the size of the square. If there were not so many living beings, there was obviously no need for the square to be so big. Currently, the thousands of people in the square only occupied about 1,000th of the area, which was almost like a drop in the ocean. Looking at the scene, there were at least millions of living beings who had not yet left the battlefield. And for every 100 million people, there would only be 10 survivors. For these millions of people to survive, there would at least be trillions of living beings who had participated in the battle, Such a number was indescribably shocking even when one imagined it. Even a knowledgeable Luo fan could not help but feel emotional. What happened next was just as Luo fan had expected. More and more living beings appeared in the square, and the time between them became shorter and shorter. Under such circumstances, the square was filling up at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. However, no matter how many people appeared, the position where Luo fan and the others were at the center of the square did not move at all. No matter how fierce the newly appeared experts were, they did not dare to challenge the central position. The fundamental reason was that Luo fan and the others were the first to appear and were at the center of the square. The experts who appeared first had more time to stimulate their potential, so when the latecomers appeared, they were already far stronger than them. The effect of Luo fan's power, spirit, body, willpower, perception, and so on being strengthened by 10 times was even stronger than the effect of other people strengthening by 10,000 times. After completing the process of retrieving his power, the power of his divine ability had already been strengthened to an extremely shocking level. Although it was far from his original supreme cultivation of perfected Tao integration, he was not at a disadvantage even when facing a primordial unity, pure yang existence. If he was given time to prepare, he could even fight a connate zenith heaven cultivator. Therefore, in the process of waiting for the end of the 100 years, he began to analyze this square and the mysteries of the space in which the square was located. He wanted to find out what kind of existence or law was hidden behind it. Needless to say, his analytical ability was very powerful. He had dozens of years to analyze it. Finally, when the time limit of 100 years was up, his analysis was rather fruitful. He vaguely understood the principle behind why he could loosen the shackles that were restricting him a little when he stepped into the plaza. Although he still could not use this principle to completely break the shackles, he felt that he could loosen the shackles a little. Of course, this did not mean that he could completely break the shackles if he continued to deepen the analysis of this principle. It only meant that he could fully unleash the effect of this principle. This principle or law that loosened the shackles and allowed living beings to completely achieve supreme cultivation was a kind of principle that directly acted on living beings and could slightly change the relationship between living beings and the entire world. Because of this change, the world suppression on living beings was not as strong. This allowed living beings to break through their own limits and obtain greater power and a longer lifespan. However, the adjustment of this relationship could not be fixed. After all, everyone's situation was different. The degree of change required to achieve the same effect was also different. Hence, there was naturally room for fluctuation. What Luo Fan used was this kind of floating space. It was to raise the floating space as much as possible and loosen the shackles that restrained him as much as possible, allowing him to recover more power. In the end, when 100 years were up, Luo Fan had increased the power he could use by half, reaching about 15 times his original power. He had increased it by more than half compared to ordinary powerhouses. With Luo Fan's realm, this increase by half was enough for him to unleash tens of thousands of times more power. It gave him an even greater advantage over the survivors. When the 100-year deadline arrived, the number of creatures in the entire square increased like a geyser, just as Luo Fan had expected. In just a few short moments, the number of people that originally filled a tenth of the square had increased to a point where the entire square was densely packed. Throughout the process, spatial ripples surged back and forth, causing the entire square to flicker with all sorts of strange lights. There were even countless lights and shadows appearing in the void. Those lights and shadows were scenes of countless battles and battles. They were clearly scenes of certain battlefields. There are actually exactly 10 million people. Could it be that this isn't all of the battlefields, but only a portion? Luo Fan could not help but feel surprised when he found out the total number of living beings in the square. The reason why he had such doubts was because the number was too complete. It was so complete that it seemed to be cut out from a huge number, so he could not help but feel suspicious. Chapter 950. The first round of the blood battle has already been accommodated. Next, the second round of the blood battle will begin. The rules are the same as before. Every 10,000 people will be assigned a battlefield. All you need to do is survive the next 10 years of blood battles. In the end, only one person can survive in each battlefield. Try your best to survive until the end. I hope I can see you again in 100 years. Just as the square was filled with people, this voice poured directly into everyone's ears. Everyone's expressions changed slightly when they heard this voice. Among them, those who had appeared in the square long ago and had stimulated their strengthened potential were filled with excitement. Meanwhile, those who had just appeared, perhaps because they had just sensed their potential being strengthened, were filled with despair. This result was obviously a great advantage for those who had left the battlefield early. However, for those who had only appeared on the square at the last minute, it was an incomparably terrible situation. However, this was the rule of this blood battle. The sooner the living beings finished the blood battle, the more advantage they would obtain in the following battles. If they finished the blood battle slowly, they would naturally be at a greater disadvantage in the following battles. It was not unfair. Rather, it was the greatest fairness. The voice naturally did not care about these ants. The moment it finished speaking, a strange space-time power swept through the square. The 10 million people in the square gradually disappeared after the power passed. In the end, the square was empty, as if no living beings had ever appeared. At this moment, a figure appeared in the sky above the square. Although this figure was only at the level of a normal person, the aura he gave off filled the world. The square seemed to be unable to withstand it. It trembled slightly under this aura, as if it could collapse at any moment. The person appeared in the air and looked down at the square below. There was a hint of emotion in his eyes. He seemed to be reminiscing, but also hating. Although 1,000,000 years have passed, this blood battle is still no different from before. I wonder how many people will be qualified to challenge me this time. The person muttered to himself in the sky. The person's aura filled the world. The power contained in his body was more than several 100,000 times stronger than a normal person's. He had long since reached the realm of immortals. Aside from Luo Fan, the other 10 million people in the square could not even be crushed by a single finger of his. At this moment, the man raised his eyebrows. How did you get here so fast? With a thought, his figure disappeared, as if he had never appeared in the first place. At the instant his body disappeared, a figure appeared out of nowhere, materializing in the middle of the square. This person's expression was calm, and his figure was ordinary. The aura around his body was faint, but it was not completely hidden, nor was it deliberately dispersed. It was just released in a very normal manner. Surprisingly, this person was Luo Fan. The fact that he was able to reappear on the square meant that he had already finished off the 10,000 experts who had stepped into the battlefield with him in a short period of time. He had originally been given 10 years to finish them off. With his own strength, this speed was only natural. However, for the person who had appeared on the square earlier, it was unimaginably fast. Luo Fan appeared in the square and frowned. He lifted his head and looked at a certain spot in the void. It was at this moment that he caught a trace of that person's existence and found the place where that person had disappeared. That person's relationship with the square, or rather, with the bloody battle, was very strange. It was as if he could manipulate the laws and laws of the entire place, as well as borrow the power of the place. He had all sorts of unimaginable abilities. If he wanted to disappear without a trace, it should have been impossible for any living being weaker than him, or even living beings on the same level as him to detect him. However, what kind of existence was Luo Fan? How could he be the same as an ordinary living being? The moment he appeared, he sensed the traces that existed in the void. He discovered the traces that the creature had left behind in the void for an instant, and he followed the traces to find the figure's location. He's nearly 1,000,000 times stronger than an ordinary person and thousands of times stronger than the power I have right now. Looks like even if he's not the mastermind, he's definitely not an ordinary participant. Luo Fan thought to himself as he instantly gauged this person's strength. He had come to Dream World to find the great accomplishment quasi-saint who had created Dream World, not to participate in the bloody battle. If he had no other choice, he could only follow the rules of the bloody battle and walk step by step until he reached the end, where he could see the great accomplishment quasi-saint. However, there was clearly another choice in front of him at this moment. How could he be willing to give up? With a thought, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. In an instant, he had already stepped into the void and arrived above the void, where he had sensed that the living being was hidden. Under the living being's astonished gaze, he grabbed the void with both hands and suddenly tore it to two sides. The void instantly collapsed, revealing everything hidden behind it. In other words, it was that living being. Originally, it was impossible to tear the void of this battlefield apart without a power that was tens of millions of times stronger than an ordinary living being. This was unless one was like this living being and had the authority to control part of the battlefield. However, although Luo Fan only had a power that was hundreds of times stronger than an ordinary living being, his unimaginably profound realm and the characteristics of his power changed by the cultivation flag technique allowed him to display a power that was tens of millions of times stronger than an ordinary person. Naturally, he could easily tear the void apart. He stood there with a rather indifferent expression on his face as he said to the person who had appeared, "I want to challenge you. Do you dare to accept?" The person was extremely shocked at first, but when he heard Luo Fan's words, a cold glint flashed across his eyes. His aura suddenly increased tenfold, and a dense killing intent and iron-blooded aura surged out of his body. This was an existence called Fighting Spirit, causing Luo Fan's mind to tremble slightly. Originally, you should have had the chance to challenge me after going through 4 rounds of the bloody battle. However, since you've come before me now, I'll grant you your wish. As a warrior, I definitely won't reject any challenge. The person laughed and said. That person was also standing in a public square. However, this square was many times smaller than the square that Luo Fan had been in before. It seemed to only have a radius of 300 meters, but it was more like a training ground. After Luo Fan tore open the void, he took a step forward and stood on the square, several meters away from the person. After hearing the person agree, he did not stand on ceremony. He lifted his foot and stomped on the ground, causing the entire square to tremble slightly. A look of surprise appeared on the man's face. His back shrugged, and a huge figure wearing a full body armor rushed out from his back. The figure stood behind him and looked down at Luo Fan with a cold and ruthless expression. The figure did not have any aura, but as soon as it appeared, it continuously rejected the surrounding void, causing the surrounding void to ripple slightly. It was like a stone falling into a calm lake. From this, it could be seen how powerful the figure was. The figure was holding a huge longsword with both hands. The longsword was extremely huge and looked like a mountain. After appearing, the figure slightly trembled the longsword in his hand, producing a sharp sword whistle. Then, it suddenly blasted towards Luo Fan, directly towards Luo Fan's head. The ripples produced did not even come into contact with Luo Fan, but he already felt that the square under his feet was continuously collapsing. Even the void around him was indescribably distorted, as if it could collapse into countless fragments. Facing such a long sword, Luo Fan instantly saw through the tens of thousands of changes contained within it. He knew that no matter which direction he dodged to, he could not completely avoid it. Thus, he gave up on the idea of dodging. Lien Sa very unhappily revealed a faint smile. He raised his hand, and the longsword collapsed with a loud bang. The power and aura contained within did not disappear with the collapse of the longsword, but it completely lost its cohesion. The shadow of the longsword suddenly enlarged by hundreds of times. Although it directly hit Luo Fan, it only formed a huge ravine under his feet. It did not cause any damage to him. That person's original strength was hundreds of thousands of times that of an ordinary person. After condensing this figure, the power that he could exert was more than 10 times that of his original strength. On the other hand, Luo Fan's original strength was only a few hundred times that of an ordinary person. However, the power that he could exert was at least tens of millions of times that of an ordinary person. One could imagine the huge difference in the power that the two of them could exert. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan was naturally able to easily disintegrate all of the attacks from the person in front of him. With just a slight thought, he had completely erased the will that the person had placed on the longsword. On the other hand, the longsword itself was condensed from power. Without the person's will in it, it was just power. It cannot be condensed at all. So how could it have great power? That was the reason why such a situation had occurred. At this moment, the person finally revealed a horrified expression. The figure behind him sank and compressed crazily. In the end, it compressed into a full-body armor on the surface of the person's body, causing the person's aura to be greatly strengthened. Then, his figure flickered and appeared above Luo Fan's head, as if there was no need for any time. He raised his hands as if he was holding water bottles and slammed them down at Luo Fan. Luo Fan understood all of this very clearly. The moment the two hands blasted down, his figure trembled, and he directly broke the lock of the two hands. With a light step, he arrived behind the man, raised his hand, and directly jabbed the back of the man's head. Although it was just a poke, the person's armor that was supposed to be able to withstand all attacks was like a piece of paper. It was easily poked through by the poke, and even allowed Lin Huang's finger to come into contact with the person's skull. Just as it was about to poke through, the person finally reacted. With the help of his authority to control the square, his figure disappeared on the spot. Luo Fan frowned. He felt that it was a pity as he looked at the blood that was continuously dripping from his hand. Just a little bit more, and he would have been able to annihilate this person. However, it was precisely because of this small difference that the person had disappeared to who knew where. If they wanted to find him again, it would be much more troublesome than it was now. Of course, it was just troublesome. It wasn't impossible to find him. With a thought, Luo Fan had already caught hold of the person's remaining aura. He tore open the void in front of him with both hands and rushed in. He arrived at another place that he was familiar with. It was a huge square. When he stepped into the square, he was greeted by a fist that was shining with golden light. This was the person's fist that was wrapped in armor. The speed and strength of this fist were extremely astonishing, and there were countless mysterious changes within it. Moreover, it had an astonishing lock-on ability. Facing this fist head-on, even Luo Fan couldn't help but feel that there was nowhere to hide and that he couldn't resist it. However, this could only last for a split second. How profound was Luo Fan's realm? Even a martial emperor, who had cultivated martial arts to the point of almost forming his own path, couldn't use his own martial arts to completely suppress him, let alone a tiny creature in this dream world. Luo Fan's mind shook, and he immediately suppressed this feeling. He raised his right hand and seemed to travel through time and space to appear before the fist. He suddenly clenched his hand and grabbed the fist. The power of his clench was earth-shattering. The void that he clenched directly crumbled into spatial powder, dispersing in all directions like smoke. The person had only used this move after countless preparations. Although it was impossible for him to predict every situation, it was impossible for him to throw such a crude and simple punch without caring about anything else. As a result, the moment Luo Fan's right hand was about to grab the person's fist, he suddenly bent his knee and punched towards Luo Fan's chest. Above his knees, rays of light were shining, as if all the rays of light and power in the universe had been condensed. The void was no longer distorted, but directly shattered, directly producing space smoke, forming a string of small black holes that surrounded his knees and crashed into Luo Fan's chest and abdomen along with his knees. Even if Luo Fan could exert tens of millions of times the strength of a normal creature, his body was only a few hundred times stronger than that of a normal creature. If such a collision were to hit his body without reservation, then what awaited him would be the complete collapse of his body. Even his spirit would be greatly damaged, and it was even possible that it would directly collapse and perish. In the face of all this, Luo Fan merely smiled. His right hand, which had been clenched into a fist, suddenly pressed down on the person's fist, causing the fist to suddenly smash down as if it had traveled through time and space. It directly collided with the knee that was crashing towards Luo Fan's chest. A shocking shockwave erupted, causing the person to let out a miserable howl. The person's knee was slightly more powerful than the person's fist. When the two collided without holding back, it was clear that the person who had won was the knee. The outcome of the loser was very obvious. Given the power of the knee that could blast a string of tiny black holes in space, how could the person's fist survive? In the bombardment, it turned into powder and completely disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. Of course, the knee had endured the bombardment of the fist, so the force of the recoil was definitely not small. Although it did not shatter, it was not completely undamaged either. The kneecap was directly smashed, and it completely lost its accuracy. It directly blasted past Luo Fan's side, bringing his body across Luo Fan and rushing towards Luo Fan's back. At this moment, the spatial crack that Luo Fan had just torn open had not disappeared. With this rush, he directly rushed back to the square where he had been before and directly collided with the square, causing a loud bang. The entire square shook again, and countless gravel violently flew in all directions. Luo Fan smiled slightly and stepped into the spatial crack again. When he arrived at the square, he directly stood beside the person. He lowered his head to look at the person and said, "You lost." At this moment, the person's expression was cold. He was gasping and lying there, his body trembling slightly. He said, "Is that so? I don't think so." As he spoke, no one knew what he did, but the entire square suddenly shook. The top of Luo Fan's head became the bottom of his feet, and the bottom of his feet became the top of his head. The square directly appeared above Luo Fan's head and exploded in an instant. Then it suddenly condensed and formed a huge ball, directly wrapping Luo Fan within it. As for the person, he had disappeared without a trace, and no one knew where he had gone. Then, the ball that tightly wrapped around Luo Fan from all directions rapidly condensed, and the remaining space within it became smaller and smaller. The powerful pressure even directly acted on the void, causing the void to continuously collapse and shatter. It also made Luo Fan feel an indescribable pressure, as if it was constantly crushing him, as if it wanted to completely crush him into powder. The ball was formed from a square, so one could imagine how huge it was. At this moment, it seemed to be imbued with an indestructible property, making it impossible for him to destroy it. It seemed like he could only wait for death, waiting for the sphere to shrink the space in the center into nothingness and turn him into dust. However, Luo Fan sighed and said, "I originally wanted to spare your life. Why did you force me?" As he spoke, a bright red light flashed on his body, and he directly pushed aside all the external influences. He took a step forward, as if the ball around him did not exist at all. He directly crossed thousands of feet and arrived outside the ball, which had a radius of thousands of feet. On the surface of the ball, he saw the creature with a broken body, missing an arm, and a completely shattered knee. At this moment, the creature was looking at Luo Fan in disbelief. Chapter 9:51. Facing this person, Luo Fan smiled slightly and did not bother to say anything. He raised his hand and grabbed at the person. It was as if an indescribable force had acted on him out of thin air. He let out a blood-curdling scream, and his entire body was directly condensed into a fist-sized piece of meat. Subsequently, Luo Fan raised his hand, and the piece of meat exploded with a loud bang, turning into countless tiny pieces of meat and blood. His body and Dao had vanished, and his soul had dispersed. The moment the person died, the huge ball that was originally under Luo Fan's feet suddenly shook and suddenly became blurry. Following that, light flashed, and everything returned to the way he saw it for the first time. It was as if nothing had ever changed. At the same time, Luo Fan only felt a strange connection descend from nothingness and connect with his mind. This kind of connection was extremely mysterious, directly pulling him together with an incomparably strange existence. The moment this connection was completely established, a vast world appeared between his divine will. This vast world was formed by more than 1 million spaces. These spaces were divided into 4 layers according to some complicated rules. From the outside to the inside, the closer to the center, the fewer spaces there were. There were a total of 1 million spaces in the outermost layer, but there were only 1,000 spaces left in the second layer. At the third layer, there were only 100 spaces left, and at the fourth layer, the number of spaces was reduced to 10. The fifth layer was the huge square and the small square attached to the square that he had complete control over. When sensing this huge world, Luo Fan understood that this was the world he was in at the moment, the world where the blood battle was taking place. The outermost layer of 1 million spaces was where he had stayed for decades, and it was where the 1 million battlefields of the first round of the blood battle were. The second layer was the battlefield where the second round of the bloody battle was taking place. Based on this, the 100 spaces on the third layer should be where the third round of the blood battle was taking place. The fourth layer was a space, which was naturally where the fourth round of the blood battle was taking place. It seems that if I defeat that person, I will completely replace him. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind as he sensed all these things. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, an invisible message was transmitted directly to him from an unknown place. At the same time, the huge shackles that had been placed on him ever since he stepped into this dream world suddenly loosened. Although they were not completely released, he already felt a sense of joy as if he had been dragged out of a cage. That formless information was the rules of this blood battle and its goal. The loosening of the shackles was clearly a result of Dreamscape loosening its restrictions on him after he replaced that person's position. This bloody battle was the main character of the Dreamscape. Although the bloody war only occurred once every million years, everything in the Dreamscape was supporting the bloody war. The million years between the two bloody wars were all for the sake of the bloody war, accumulating countless experts for the bloody war. The final goal of the bloody war was to select a supreme expert to challenge the creator of this world, the supreme existence of this world, and let that existence enjoy the joy of battle. The bloody war that Luo Fan was currently in control of was one of the billions of bloody wars in the Dreamscape. In other words, there were billions of bloody wars in the Dreamscape that were on the same scale as this one. In fact, there were even fewer bloody wars, but on an even larger scale, with even more powerful people in control. At the beginning of this bloody war, there were 1 million small spaces that served as the battlefield, and each small space contained 100 million experts. In total, there were hundreds of trillions of living beings in this bloody war. There were billions of such battlefields, and there were even larger ones. This meant that the number of living beings participating in this bloody war had reached a level that even Luo Fan could not imagine. I didn't expect it to be like this. Luo Fan sighed, feeling helpless. He originally thought that finding the master of this dream world would be his biggest problem in this dream world, but he did not expect the truth to be so unexpected. This dream world was completely different from the other 2 dream worlds he had experienced. It directly placed the creator of the world in a supreme position and directly gave him a way to challenge the creator of the world. As long as he followed the path, he would naturally be able to walk in front of the creator of the world and challenge him. Although it was beneficial for him to pass the 9,993 trials, he couldn't help but feel as though he was punching cotton. Naturally, it wasn't a good feeling. Since that's the case, I'll give it a try. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. Since the Great Completion Quasi-Saint had already placed him as a high and mighty target, he naturally would not be courteous with him. So what if he followed the path that the Quasi-Saint had set for him? Among the billions of battlefields, there would be billions of living beings participating in each battlefield. After 4 rounds, only 10 people would remain. Among these 10 people, they could choose to challenge the controller, or they could choose to continue participating in the bloody war. If they chose to challenge the controller and failed, they would recover to their peak state and directly participate in the 5th round of the bloody war where all the losers gathered. If he succeeded, he would become a new controller, and he would no longer have to participate in the next blood war. Instead, he would be able to live safely for 1 million years, and when the next blood war began, he would be able to control a blood war battlefield. This would continue until someone successfully challenged him. The expert that Luo Fan had defeated previously had successfully defended his position as the controller 10 times. In other words, he had lived for at least millions of years. It was precisely because of this rule that when that person first appeared, he would say how many people would challenge him. Continuing to participate in the bloody war and becoming a controller had their own benefits. Continuing to participate in the next bloody war would increase one's potential, which would further increase one's strength and extend one's lifespan. As for becoming a controller, although one would not obtain greater strength or a longer lifespan, one would be able to live safely for millions of years without being limited by one's lifespan and without any danger to one's life. There was no difference between these two choices. It all depended on the strength of one's body. The 4 bloody wars will be completed in 111 years. I still have about 11 years left. This period of time is barely enough for me to recover all the strength that I've relaxed. With this thought, Luo Fan sat down cross-legged on the square and slowly cultivated the flag technique to improve himself. After becoming the controller of the bloody war, he had countless conveniences for cultivating here. This allowed his cultivation speed to be many times faster than normal. His aura grew stronger almost every second, and with every breath he took, the power in his body began to undergo a leap. The bloody battlefield had its own rules. Even if Luo Fan had become the controller of the battlefield, it was still impossible for him to change the rules of the battlefield at will. He didn't need to do anything in the battlefield. The rules of the battlefield would naturally be able to complete all arrangements. Once the requirements for the end of the battle were met, the survivors would naturally be transferred to the huge square. Once the deadline was reached, the survivors would naturally be reclassified and sent to participate in the next round of the bloody war. In this way, an extremely perfect process had been formed. As the controller, Luo Fan's job was only to deal with some accidents and to be challenged in the future. In fact, it did not matter much whether he was there or not. It was precisely because of this that he could cultivate on his own so easily. During the process of cultivation, Luo Fan's strength continued to increase. Before he knew it, it had already increased to more than 1,000,000 times that of a normal living being. His soul, his perception, his will, and everything else had also been improved to a corresponding level. When he finally completed all the breakthroughs, an inexplicable feeling appeared in his heart. In the blink of an eye, he felt that the effect of time in the dream realm on him had been reduced by countless times. It reached a faintly discernible state and actually allowed him to achieve a realm similar to immortality in another way. When this feeling appeared, Luo Fan knew that this was probably a realm similar to the immortal realm in this world. The immortal realm in this world actually exists in this way. It's really mysterious. Luo Fan secretly marveled. The immortal realm in the real world made one's life source extremely stable. At the same time, one's own power could be increased to a realm that could replenish the life source at any time in order to achieve the goal of immortality. Even Luo Fan himself would not exceed this scope. It was just that the stability of his life source had reached an unimaginable realm and was many times stronger than that of an ordinary perfected Tao integration cultivator. In this dream world, there were no truly exquisite cultivation methods, nor were there truly perfect immortal cultivation methods. Ordinary warriors would simply cultivate their strength. Even if there were more special ones, they would only cultivate their spirit and physical bodies. Normally speaking, how could a warrior attain immortality? In the beginning, Luo Fan had still been puzzled. He had secretly wondered what kind of strange things would happen after becoming powerful to allow these warriors to obtain immortality. However, he had not expected that it would be such an exquisite method that could actually directly change the attributes of living beings in time and space, greatly increasing their immunity to time. Thus, they could take a detour and obtain another kind of immortality. Such a method made Luo Fan's eyes flash with a hint of enlightenment. It seems that this method is not impossible to achieve outside of the dream world. If this method is combined with the immortal cultivation method, it may produce incredible results. Luo Fan thought. Although it was impossible to directly change the world outside the dream realm, to change the space-time attributes of living beings, It could directly allow living beings to directly change their own space-time attributes through cultivation, thereby strengthening their immunity to time. Furthermore, the result of this would not only allow living beings to obtain a longer life, but would also greatly enhance their ability to use space-time. If he continued to develop from this perspective, it would not be difficult to eventually develop a perfect cultivation system. Since Luo Fan had plenty of time at the moment, he naturally did not mind wasting some time to create such a method. As a powerful existence at the perfected Tao integration realm, Luo Fan's mastery of cultivation techniques had already reached the acme of perfection, and he could do it with ease. Since he already knew what he had to achieve and even understood the specific train of thought to follow, it was naturally extremely easy for Luo Fan to create such a method. In the end, when the fourth round of the bloody battle was completed, Luo Fan finally created this cultivation method. When this cultivation method was created, the dream realm seemed to shake a few times, and even the bloody battlefield seemed to undergo some subtle changes. This change was the same as in the previous dream realm, where the ratio between the projection and reality had changed. However, this time, although it was also a real increase in weight, the increase was negligible. Not to mention, compared to the star system in the previous dream world, even Luo Fan, as the controller of this bloody battlefield, might have overlooked this change if he had not carefully experienced all the changes within it. It seems that this method is also quite promising. Sensing this change, Luo Fan could not help but smile. Although the change was insignificant, the fact that it could cause a change in the void of the outside world as soon as it was created and even make the world between projection and reality more realistic was enough to show how extraordinary this method was. This cultivation method had a lot of inspirations for Luo Fan. Although it was not as exquisite as many of the cultivation methods Luo Fan had created in the past, due to its unique train of thought, Luo Fan could not bear to let it become a nameless method. With a thought, he named this cultivation method Space-Time Escape. It was divided into two parts, Space-Time Escape and Space-Time Escape. It explained the specific method of how to change one's time attribute and control attribute through cultivation. After deciding on the name, his mind moved slightly, and the flag's technique changed. It swallowed the essence of Space-Time Escape. His own life attribute changed along with it, and he could vaguely see through many truths of the world that he couldn't see before. His gaze easily passed through this bloody battlefield and directly saw the situation outside the battlefield. With one look, he felt a wave of shock. In addition to the worlds that were similar to the bloody battlefield that Luo Fan was in, there were also many worlds that were many times larger than this bloody battlefield. These worlds, layer by layer, formed an incomparably huge pyramid. Among them, the bloody battlefield that Luo Fan was in was only at the bottom of this pyramid. This world, along with 100 other similar worlds, supported a world that was dozens of times larger than this bloody battlefield. The 100 worlds supported by this bloody battlefield supported another world that was dozens of times larger than this one. In this way, a 6-story pyramid was formed. Although it was only 6 levels tall, the number of worlds it contained was already more than 10 billion. Even Luo Fan could not help but feel shocked. He admired the courage of the great accomplishment quasi-saint who made this dream. Luo Fan thought that his courage was extremely shocking, but the Void Wuji Palace that he refined only contained millions of worlds. Most of them were minor kiliocosms, and there was only one major kiliocosm. In the dream of the great accomplishment quasi-saint, there were more than 10 billion worlds. Even the smallest of these worlds was the size of a medium kiliocosm. Compared to such boldness, how could his limitless void palace be considered as anything? However, he couldn't help but feel admiration for his boldness. With such means and courage, it is no wonder that he is a great accomplishment quasi-saint. It is no wonder that he can sit on a supreme throne in the dream world, waiting for people to challenge him. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He could not help but want to get to know the great accomplishment quasi-saint. This was the first time he had the desire to get to know a living being since he stepped on the transcendence path. Of course, The other living beings were just illusions to him, but the great perfection sage-to-be was a real existence. However, the most important reason was that he was shocked by the spirit of the great perfection sage-to-be. The more Luo Fan thought about it, the more he admired the courage of the great accomplishment quasi-saint. This was just a bloody battlefield, and the living beings here were not all of the living beings in the dream world. Obviously, if this was the case, there would not be enough living beings to participate in the next bloody battle, even after 1 trillion years. Beyond these 10 billion worlds, there must be a huge world. The number of living beings living in that world would definitely be many times more than the number of living beings participating in this bloody battlefield. In this bloody battlefield where Luo Fan was located, there were hundreds of trillions of living beings participating in it. How many living beings were there in such a battlefield with more than 10 billion living beings? In order to support the survival of more living beings, how big would that world need to be? It's just a dream. Is there a need to spend so much money? Luo Fan thought about it, and could not help but smile bitterly. He was looking forward to meeting the great accomplishment quasi-saint. Chapter 952. Right at this moment, an indescribable force appeared out of thin air in the entire bloodbath battlefield. It directly acted on him and pulled him as if it wanted to pull him into another space. Sensing the changes in the world of the bloodbath battlefield, Luo Fan immediately understood what was going on. All 4 rounds of the bloodbath battlefield had been completed. At this moment, it was the final moment of the bloodbath battlefield. The reason such a force was acting on him was because someone had issued a challenge to him, the controller of the bloodbath battlefield. You've actually decided to issue a challenge so quickly. Let me see who you are. With a thought, Luo Fan's figure followed the pull of the force and directly traversed through the void to arrive in a strange space. This space was not considered large. It was only a few tens of thousands of meters in size, and it looked like a huge forest. The place where Luo Fan appeared was right above this forest. Looking down, it seemed like a dark green ocean. A breeze blew by, waves surged, and rustling sounds constantly entered his ears. At this moment, Luo Fan had completely recovered all the strength he had after the restrictions on his body had been relaxed. The strength of the divine ability was countless times stronger than before. The strength of the divine ability that he could exert had completely entered the level of a connate perfected heavenly realm cultivator. Compared to the previous controller, he was more than 10,000 times stronger. Under the activation of such a divine ability, the strength of his perception ability had also reached a rather shocking level. Therefore, as soon as he stepped into this space, although he did not see where the challenger was, he had already found his location with a slight thought. That person had used a very strange method to blend into the forest. Perhaps it could be said that the forest was the challenger, and the challenger was the forest. So that's how it is. No wonder you issued a challenge now. Looks like the faster you issue a challenge, the more advantageous the battlefield you can choose. If the previous controller was here, he might have lost because of such a battlefield. Unfortunately, you encountered me. Luo Fan sighed. At this moment, only a few days had passed since the end of the 4 rounds of the bloodbath battlefield. In such a short period of time, it was the potential gained after completing 4 rounds of blood battles. Those who had completed the blood battles definitely hadn't fully grasped it yet. In other words, at this moment, the challengers who had completed 4 rounds of bloody battles were at most tens of thousands of times stronger than ordinary people. Under normal circumstances, with such strength, there was naturally no chance of winning the challenge. However, because of this battlefield, it wasn't difficult for him to unleash power that was 100 times greater than his own strength. In this case, if he were to challenge the original controller, his chances of winning would indeed be quite high. Come out. Let me see what kind of power you have. Luo Fan shouted as he stared at a spot in the forest. That was where the challenger's was located. The challenger had fused with the entire forest. He was the forest, and the forest was him. However, just like how ordinary people had a brain, even though they were one body, it was impossible for the challenger's will to be spread throughout the entire forest. Instead, It had to be condensed somewhere in the forest. The challenger naturally didn't believe that Luo Fan could discover him so easily. When Luo Fan said that, he shifted his position slightly and moved to another spot that was extremely far away from where he was. With one look, Luo Fan naturally knew that this person didn't believe that he could see through his tracks. He smiled and said, "Is there any point in shifting like this?" As he spoke, he shifted his gaze to where the challenger was once again. This happened again and again until the challenger finally understood that his efforts were completely futile. For a moment, he felt an indescribable despair. He felt that he had chosen the worst challenge method out of all the choices he had. As the forest rippled, a huge tree ant rose from the ground. It quickly rose into the sky and appeared in front of Luo Fan. The challenger's will was condensed within the Trent's body. A controller is indeed a controller. I originally wanted to take advantage of you, but I didn't expect that I would walk right into a trap. Before you leave, can you tell me your name so that I know who defeated you? The trance said with a buzzing voice. Luo Fan looked at the will within the Trent's body and smiled. He said, "I didn't expect you to have such an exquisite method. It's an eye-opener for me. However, you don't need to be discouraged. I called you out, but I have no intention of killing you. No one will die in this round of challenges," the trance said indifferently. Luo Fan chuckled. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The trance was wrapped up by a force. A sense of death directly affected the Trent's mind, letting him know that his life was in Luo Fan's hands. If Luo Fan was in a bad mood, he would definitely die and his soul would scatter. He would no longer have any chance of survival. Continuing to challenge the blood battle would become empty talk. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel an inexplicable fear. He quickly said, "That's impossible. The rules of the blood battle were set by the Creator. How can it be broken? The rules that the Creator set back then have a way to circumvent the restrictions, as long as your control over the battlefield reaches a certain limit," Luo Fan said with a faint smile. The Treant couldn't help but be speechless. Luo Fan retracted his hand and let go of the Trent's will. He said, "All right, now you know that I wasn't bluffing." The Treant didn't dare to be arrogant anymore. He could only nod and didn't dare to say another word. "You're still quite rational. In that case, I'll leave the identity of the controller to you," Luo Fan said with a smile. The Treant was originally waiting for Luo Fan to ask a difficult question in exchange for his life. When he suddenly heard this, he couldn't help but be shocked. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Luo Fan with a look of disbelief. He was tongue-tied and didn't know what to say. What did you say? Did I hear it wrong?" The Treant was tongue-tied. "You didn't hear it wrong," Luo Fan said. After saying that, he didn't want to waste any more time with the Treant. With a thought, he triggered the rules of the blood battle battlefield. The inexplicable connection between the scale and the entire blood battle battlefield was instantly cut off. Next, his body was affected by an indescribably vast power. He directly broke through the blood battle battlefield and floated upwards. He directly landed in the world that was supported by the 100 blood battle battlefields above the blood battle battlefield. As for how the Treant unbelievably enjoyed the wonderful feeling of being the controller, it wasn't something that he cared about. As for how the Treant withstood the challenges of the other challengers, it was also not something that he could care about. As soon as he entered this world, he saw a huge square. This square was much smaller than the squares where the challengers were before, but it was still majestic and majestic. Standing here, one would naturally feel incomparably small. There were currently dozens of figures sparsely scattered in the entire square. Each of these people exuded a strong, murderous aura, and the aura on any one of them was stronger than that of the controller Luo Fan had encountered before. They occupied various positions in the square, and the distance between each other was extremely large. It was obvious that they were on guard against each other. The moment Luo Fan appeared in the square, the dozens of people turned their gazes over and looked at him with a measuring gaze. At a glance, Luo Fan could tell that they were only measuring his strength to determine how much of a threat he posed. Naturally, Luo Fan didn't care at all. He didn't activate his aura. nor did he activate his power. He just sat down cross-legged and began to carefully comprehend this world, searching for the controller of this world. This world was dozens of times larger than the bloody battlefield that he had controlled before. The stability of space and time was also dozens of times stronger. It was extremely difficult to comprehend the rules and laws of this world and find the location of the controller. Even if Luo Fan had unimaginable abilities, it was impossible for him to find the controller as soon as he stepped into this world. The dozens of people who had previously appeared in the plaza looked at Luo Fan for a while before withdrawing their gazes with extreme vigilance. Some of them even moved their bodies further away from Luo Fan. This was natural. Since these powerhouses could appear here, they clearly weren't stupid weaklings. When they were observing Luo Fan, they couldn't determine Luo Fan's strength at all. They couldn't even grasp his aura. Under such circumstances, how could they not understand that Luo Fan was stronger than them? How could they not be vigilant and stay away from him? Next, more people appeared in the square out of thin air one after another. These people all had extremely powerful auras. Some were even covered in injuries, as if they had experienced extremely intense battles. Their appearance caused the square to become more and more bustling. After an unknown period of time, just when Luo Fan felt that he had vaguely found a flaw and was about to grasp the existence of the controller, an indescribable power swept through the square. At the same time, a wave of information flowed into the minds of everyone present along with this energy. The number of people in the 5th round of the bloody battle has reached the minimum requirement. The 5th round of the bloody battle has begun. As the words were spoken, everyone present disappeared into thin air. The entire square became empty, as if no one had ever appeared in the square. After a while, the space fluctuated and a person appeared in the square. Huh, I'm the fastest to arrive? It seems that I'm indeed the strongest, haha. Next, another person appeared out of thin air. That person looked around and also had a joyful expression. However, he looked at the person who had appeared first with an extremely vigilant gaze. The situation was the same as what had happened to those people on the plaza earlier. At this moment, Luo Fan appeared in a huge space. This space looked like a continent, and there were countless powerful auras on the continent. Waves of intense malice wrapped around him, suppressing him. The number of people participating in the 5th round of the bloody battle is 100. The time limit is 100 years. The final goal is to survive and kill all the others. If the number of people who arrive in 100 years exceeds 1, the number of people who exceed the limit will be randomly wiped out. Such information appeared in his mind. It's this kind of massacre again. However, it seems to be many times more difficult than the previous rounds. At least there weren't so many malicious creatures in the previous battlefields. Luo Fan couldn't help but smile helplessly. There were probably tens of billions of creatures in this battlefield. It was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to find 100 people among so many malicious creatures and kill them. However, the style of this bloody battlefield seems to be completely different from the previous one. It's actually so mechanical, not as lively as the previous battlefield. It seems that the quality of this bloody battlefield has something to do with the controller. I just don't know what the corresponding relationship is. As this thought flashed through his mind, he thought of another strange characteristic. He was currently at a mountain peak that wasn't very high. Just as he was thinking about this, there was a huge tiger roar behind him. Then, a black shadow enveloped him, and an unpleasant stench directly poured into his nostrils, causing him to involuntarily frown. A beast is a beast. No matter how strong it is, it's just an object on the anvil. Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed upwards, then smashed downwards. With a loud bang, an extremely ferocious-looking black tiger with a height of over 100 meters and a body covered in thick armor collided with the mountain peak. After the loud rumble, the black tiger crashed into the mountain peak, and the entire mountain collapsed into countless pieces. Amidst the smoke and dust, the black tiger let out a low roar and directly turned into minced meat. It's 1,000,000 times stronger than a normal person, almost surpassing everyone. It seems that the real opponents in this round are not other people, but these monsters. Luo Fan slightly sensed the Black Tiger's strength and finally made a judgment. This round was actually a test of survival ability. The longer one could survive in this endless world of life, the more chances they would have to complete this round of bloody battles. Despite making a judgment in his heart, Luo Fan didn't plan on going according to plan. Just now, he had almost grasped the traces of the person in control. Due to the fact that there were a few layers separating them, it was impossible for him to find the traces completely. Hence, he was unwilling to stay on the battlefield for even a second longer. With a thought, the positions of the 100 or so people were directly reflected in his mind. Among the 100 or so people, 3 had already died. They were extremely unlucky, being ambushed by exotic beasts as soon as they entered the battlefield. They couldn't hold on and died, their souls scattered. Those exotic beasts were a great threat to others, but to Luo Fan, they posed no threat at all. He took a step forward, shrinking the distance between them. Soon, he arrived at the place closest to him, where the experts participating in the bloody battles were. That expert was currently fighting a snake-like exotic beast. When he suddenly noticed Luo Fan's arrival, he couldn't help but look surprised. Although he didn't panic and let the snake-like exotic beast succeed, he was panicking. He retreated as he fought, wanting nothing more than to disappear from where he was. Luo Fan naturally wouldn't be courteous with him. He sighed and raised a finger. A bright red light pierced through the air and directly entered the center of the expert's brow, directly wiping out his soul and causing him to lose control of his power. He exploded with a loud bang, producing a deafening sound. The snake-like exotic beast couldn't dodge in time and exploded into countless pieces of flesh and blood. It had taken the expert down with it. After Luo Fan wiped out the expert's soul, he didn't stop at all. He continued to move to another location. No matter how strong these experts were, they were only at the same level as the controllers Luo Fan had challenged before. No matter how big the difference was, it was only a few times. Luo Fan could already defeat them when his power was only a few hundred times that of an ordinary person. Now that his power was 1,000,000 times that of an ordinary person, it was naturally a piece of cake for him to defeat them. Therefore, in just a few dozen breaths, he had already walked through the entire battlefield and killed all the experts on the battlefield, ending the 5th round of the bloody battles. When the last expert exploded in front of Luo Fan, a strange wave swept past him. Then his figure blurred, and he disappeared from the battlefield. When he reappeared, he was already in another plaza. This square was more than 10 times smaller than the previous one, but it looked more noble and sturdy. At the same time, it was also more majestic and magnificent. You spent 33 breaths to complete the 5th round of the blood battle. Among the 36.5 billion blood battles since ancient times, you are ranked 3rd. If you didn't stay at the top of the mountain for so many breaths, you might have been able to raise your ranking to 1st. At this moment, a voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Then, a silhouette slowly materialized in front of him. It was a middle-aged man. His figure and appearance were only at the standard of an ordinary person. His expression was extremely cold, like an ice sculpture. However, although this person looked very similar, his voice was different from the voice that Luo Fan had heard before, the voice that announced the rules of the Blood War. Obviously, they were not the same voice. Luo Fan sensed this person's power and found that it was 100 times stronger than his. However, it was millions of times stronger than an ordinary person. When such a powerful force resided in such a body, the aura it emanated was so powerful that it seemed as if it blotted out the heavens and the earth and enveloped the space and the surroundings. Millions of times stronger than an ordinary person meant that he had barely reached the primordial pure yang realm. If his strength as a controller was included, then perhaps his strength would increase by a few dozen times or even a few hundred times. However, he would still only be at the primordial pure yang realm. After all, the boundary of the innate golden heavenly realm wasn't so easily crossed. Such strength was an absolute crushing advantage for the other participants, but for Luo Fan, there was no way for him to feel threatened. You came at the right time. You saved me the trouble. Luo Fan didn't answer him and just sighed. Chapter 9:53. The person's cold and rigid face froze slightly, and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes. Luo Fan did not care whether the person was surprised or not. With a thought, he raised his hand and grabbed. The shadow of a large flag appeared in his hand, and he pressed it down on the person. This large flag was a product that Luo Fan had condensed after cultivating his flag technique to a certain level, and he used his own power to condense the mysteries of the times. Of course, although Luo Fan had already summoned his own power to a state that surpassed an ordinary person's by 1,000,000 times, he was still far from being able to truly condense that shocking amount of power to form a combination of power. Hence, although the large flag had been condensed, it seemed extremely broken and illusory. The power that it could unleash was less than 1,000,000th of its normal power. However, although it could only unleash such a small amount of power, it was more than enough to deal with the battle at the moment. In the previous bloody battlefield, when Luo Fan had comprehended the space-time escape technique, he had integrated it into his own large flag technique because of its ingenuity. The bright red large flag that was summoned at the moment naturally contained the various mysteries of the space-time escape. When it was shot out, it seemed as if it did not need to pass through any time or space at all, and it directly came into contact with the person's head. The person only felt a wave of intense pain, and before he could even scream, his entire body turned into powder and turned into nothingness. The moment that person disappeared, an indescribable connection was directly connected to Luo Fan's mind from that person's body. In an instant, he felt as if he had complete control over the entire battlefield. This feeling was so familiar that Luo Fan instantly understood that this was a sign that he had become the new controller of this bloody battlefield. At this moment, the originally relaxed shackles became even looser. After sensing it slightly, Luo Fan knew that he should be able to summon his power back to more than 100 times his current power. Compared to the time when he had just completed the 5th round of the bloody battle, the color of his face was several times stronger. Originally, there should not be such great benefits for challenging a controller. Normally speaking, if it was an ordinary living being, it would definitely die. Even if he succeeded in challenging the controller, his potential wouldn't change. After completing the blood battle, however much his potential increased would be the same. But Luo Fan was different from others. Luo Fan had an outstanding understanding of the restrictions of the dream world. After becoming the controller of this battlefield, because of his absolute control over this battlefield, he could naturally use the power of this battlefield to break the shackles that were restricting him. This naturally made the restrictions on him more relaxed, allowing him to obtain more power. He raised his head and looked over. His eyes pierced through the battlefield and saw all sorts of mysteries beyond it. This battlefield was supported by 100 world battlefields. But above this battlefield, there was also a huge battlefield, or rather, a huge world that was dozens of times larger than this battlefield, together with 100 other worlds of the same size. Now, we'll just have to go with the flow. There will no longer be any obstructions. Luo Fan slightly smiled, his heart full of confidence. His gaze had already locked onto the huge world above the 6th layer, which was tens of thousands of times bigger than this world. Although he could not see through that world, although he couldn't see through it, he could vaguely sense an extremely powerful aura in that world, one that had fused with the entire dreamscape. With a thought, the power in his body began to operate. His strength, spirit, perception, will, and body were all constantly strengthened in this process. With the support of this battlefield world, Luo Fan's cultivation speed was naturally many times faster than usual. In a short span of 3 years, he had completed the entire process of cultivation, successfully increasing his various abilities to the limit of what he could grow. Come to think of it, he was hundreds of millions of times stronger than an ordinary person. With such strength, he could barely be considered to have stepped into the primordial unity pure yang level. Coupled with the fact that he could unleash power that was tens of millions of times greater than usual, The power of his current divine abilities was already comparable to that of an ordinary destroyer. If he still couldn't complete the next bloody battle with such strength, then Luo Fan might as well commit suicide. In that case, Luo Fan might as well commit suicide. Continuing to live in this world would only be a waste of vitality. Although 3 years had passed, the plaza had remained empty the entire time. Clearly, no one had followed him to complete the 5th round of the bloody battle. It was unknown whether the number of people in the huge square had not reached the requirements for the 5th round of the bloody battle, or whether they had already reached the requirements and started the 5th round of the bloody battle, but they had not reached the requirements for the bloody battle to end. Luo Fan faintly smiled. With a slight thought, he directly gave up the identity of the controller. As he gave up this identity, a strange power acted on his body. His figure directly ascended, directly leaving this battlefield world. Through some extremely mysterious channel, he stepped into the battlefield world of the next level. As for what would happen to the battlefield world without a controller, who would become the controller, and how would the challenges happen? However, he didn't care about all of this anymore. He was still in a square. However, this time, the square was empty. There was not a single person in sight. The square was about the same size as the previous battlefield world, but the aura coming from it was even more majestic and boundless, making one's heart tremble. Oh, you actually finished the first 5 rounds of the bloody battle so quickly. You're not simple. At this moment, the void in front of Luo Fan slightly distorted, and a figure gradually outlined in front of him. It was a young man, a very handsome young man. He looked very surprised at the moment, as if he had seen something unbelievable. When Luo Fan saw this person, he knew that he was the controller of this battlefield world. The power of his divine ability was only a few times stronger than what he currently had. However, it was still equivalent to a primordial unity pure yang level. Luo Fan smiled. He naturally knew why the controller had appeared in front of him. Clearly, he thought that his speed was simply too fast. In the eyes of the controller, the 5th round should not have started yet. Yet, there was actually someone who was able to pass through the 5th round and arrive at the 3rd level of the bloody battlefield. Just how unbelievable was this? One could well imagine how curious he was. He wanted to see exactly what that person looked like with his own eyes. He wanted to see if the controller had 3 heads and 6 arms. Right now, he wanted to pass the trial as quickly as possible and reach the 6th level as soon as possible. He wanted to see the creator of this world, who is also the great accomplishment sage-to-be who created this dream world. He wanted to see what the great accomplishment sage-to-be who could create such a grand dreamscape looked like, and what kind of divine ability he had. Therefore, he naturally didn't have any intention of staying here and getting entangled with the controller. Therefore, he didn't waste any more words. He simply apologized and waved his hand. A bright red flag appeared in front of him. He swooped down and, similarly, transcended time and space, came into contact with the controller's head. Similarly, he didn't stop at all before he turned that person into powder, causing his body to perish and his soul to scatter. Just as he completed his goal of destroying the controller, a strange connection took effect on his body. In an instant, he felt like he had absolute control over the entire battlefield world. It locked his body. The shackles that prevented his power from returning to his body, which made his soul, his senses, his will, and his body extremely weak, instantly loosened up a little more. An incomparably wonderful feeling of ease washed over him once again. This time, it was nearly 200 times more powerful. The more powerful a battlefield world was, the more powerful it would be. After taking control of such a world, he would be able to borrow even more power from it. Ordinary people could only gain a few dozen times more power after completing all the bloody battles in a world. However, with the help of this battlefield world, he could increase his power to nearly 200 times more. Such an increase was barely enough for him to restore his cultivation realm to the innate Grand Luo. When he cultivated before this, every increase in cultivation realm was hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of times more powerful. According to normal cultivation, If he wanted to advance from the primordial yang realm to the innate grand luo, he would need to increase his cultivation realm by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of times. Right now, it seemed contradictory and absurd that he could step into the realm of the innate grand luo with just a 200-fold increase. However, in reality, it was very normal. There were countless cultivation methods in the world. Some of these cultivation methods were strong, some were weak, some were exquisite, and some were crude. Among them, there were some methods that accumulated endless power in each realm, directly strengthening each realm to the point where it could not be strengthened any further. Only then would they be very unwilling to break through this realm and reach the next realm. Similarly, there were also some that were the complete opposite. They would use all means to shorten the span of each realm, regardless of power or anything else. As long as there was a chance, they would work hard to complete the breakthrough and step into the next realm. Luo Fan's original normal cultivation method was the first one mentioned above. It was to do everything possible to strengthen each realm and accumulate all the power in each realm. After such a cultivation method was cultivated, the foundation would be extremely stable and the divine abilities would be extremely vast. Every improvement would bring about a huge increase in power. If one continued to cultivate like this, although the speed of cultivation would be slow, it would be extremely stable and the possibility of reaching the supreme realm will be many times higher than ordinary cultivation methods. In fact, the cultivation methods of those who had reached the level of demi-saint and above in this world were usually of this type. The only difference was the degree of it. The cultivation method that Luo Fan was currently cultivating, the flag of the era, was the second one mentioned above. This method borrowed the mystery of the tide of the era and could do everything possible to shorten the span of each realm and reduce the requirements for breaking through each realm. As a result, people like Luo Fan could cross the huge leap of the primordial pure yang realm and become a connate grand luo with only 100-fold increase in power. If such a method was used to cultivate normally, it would naturally be a bumpy road. Although it shortened the power needed to break through the realm by countless times. Not only would the power after cultivation be countless times weaker than the first method, but the requirements for comprehension of the realm would also be many times higher. Unless one was a peerless genius with truly shocking talent. That was why he dared to use such a method as a fundamental method to overcome the bumpy road of Tao. If it was a normal cultivation method, Luo Fan naturally would not choose such a method to cultivate. However, he was not cultivating normally. Instead, in this world of dreams, he was constantly summoning his own power from the lock of the world shackles. In this way, the bottleneck of breaking through the realm caused by cultivating this method naturally did not exist for him. Moreover, after cultivating, the power of a magical power would be countless times weaker than the first method. This weakness was not a big deal for Luo Fan. After all, the power that he could recover was fixed. With the same power, the higher the realm, the more powerful the power could be. Although cultivating this method would be countless times weaker than cultivating the first method, the same power could be countless times stronger than the first method. Judging from a situation in this world of dreams, it was only natural that Luo Fan would choose this method. This was almost common knowledge in cultivation. Naturally, Luo Fan did not need to think too much to know. At that moment, he sat down cross-legged in the middle of the square and began to operate his cultivation method. He did not stop increasing his strength. His strength, body, spirit, mind, consciousness, perception, and everything else were constantly strengthening during this process. Another 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. He had finally spent the same amount of time to recover all the power he could, and his cultivation had also returned to the realm of a connate grand luo. Even though his strength was countless times weaker than when he was a connate golden immortal, he was still a connate golden immortal after all. At this moment, even if he didn't rely on the special ability of the flag technique, he could still barely be considered to be omnipotent. In other words, omnipotence required preparation. In other words, he could do anything. Apart from ridiculous things like ascending to sainthood, it would take a very long time For example, it would take billions of years to accomplish something. After becoming a Grand Luo again, Luo Fan felt much more relaxed, and the world he saw became much clearer. Even so, he could still sense the immeasurably stable form of existence of the world's shackles, as well as the boundless power, spirit, and might of his body that was sealed within. Over the past 3 years, no one could appear in the square. Clearly, the 5th round of the bloodbath was still in full swing, and there was still no one who could step into the 6th round. Starting from the 2nd layer of the battlefield world pyramid, while each layer was dozens of times larger than the one below, each layer could only support 1 round of the bloodbath. It was completely different from the bottom layer, which could support 4 rounds of the bloodbath. That was why even if Luo Fan did not challenge the controller, he only needed to complete 1 round of the bloodbath before he could break through the bloodbath world and step into the next layer. Moreover, he had already accomplished his grand goal of challenging the controller of the bloodbath world. Not bothering to wait for others, he simply gave up on his status as the controller of the bloodbath battlefield with a single thought. A mysterious ripple swept past, and his figure vanished from the bloodbath battlefield, heading to the next bloodbath battlefield through a mysterious channel. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the next layer, supported by 100 bloodbath worlds, a world that was dozens of times larger than this one. Of course, he did not care what happened to the original bloodbath world that had lost its controller. Just like before when he arrived at this bloodbath world, the controller of this bloodbath world was similarly surprised by his speed and appeared before him as well. Still, due to the several increments, even if Luo Fan had just stepped into this world and did not have the chance to enjoy the potential boost from succeeding in this battlefield, he already had the power to crush the controller. Naturally, he did not hold back and easily destroyed the controller. And after destroying him, because this world was much stronger than the previous world, the shackles on him were loosened even more, allowing him to take back what he had in his body right now. He had 300 times more power, his spirit, and everything else that he should have had in the first place. After spending 3 years, he also borrowed the great might of the battlefield world to complete the process of retrieving his own power, recovering his power to 300 times the power he had when he first stepped into this world. At the same time, he used the wondrous power of the Great Flag technique to break through the innate Great Luo realm, barely reaching the Perishment realm, which was equivalent to a newly ascended demi-saint. After that, he gave up on his status as the controller and stepped into the 5th layer of the battlefield world. With his cultivation that was equivalent to the Perishment realm, the controller of the 5th layer of the battlefield world would tremble the moment he sensed his existence, not daring to appear before him at all, much less have any curiosity towards him. However, this only brought him a bit of trouble. With a slight thought, he spent a few days to find the existence of the person in control. He easily killed him, and the shackles on him were loosened even further. And this reduction in his shackles allowed him to recall the power he had when he first stepped into this world, as well as many other things. 3 years later, he managed to push his cultivation to the emptiness enlightening realm, which was equivalent to a minor sage-to-be. Chapter 9:54. The moment he stepped into the largest world that stood at the top of the pyramid of the entire blood battlefield, a powerful and unparalleled aura surged toward him. The aura was vast and boundless, filling the entire universe as if the entire universe could only tremble in his palm. After stepping into this huge world, what entered Luo Fan's eyes was not the majestic square that he had seen on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th levels. Instead, it was a vast world. This world was boundless, and everything that a normal world had could be found here. The vast and boundless aura lasted for a long time after Luo Fan stepped into this world before disappearing. After it disappeared, Luo Fan sensed the various auras that belonged to this world that were previously covered by this terrifying aura. With Luo Fan's current connate Zenith Heaven cultivation realm and the special effect of the flag technique, his sensing ability was extremely shocking. In an instant, he sensed that there were extremely powerful auras in this world. Each of these auras represented an extremely powerful living being. The intensity of these auras surpassed the void-comprehending realm and reached the Tao integration realm. In fact, there were even a few auras that shocked Luo Fan. He felt that even if he was not restrained at all, he might not be able to completely suppress them in terms of power alone. This is definitely not a world that has just been created. There are many powerhouses among them, and it is by no means possible that they were specially created to welcome this bloody battle. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind in an instant. This thought made his heart move. He vaguely guessed the battle rules of this blood battlefield. As expected, at this moment, a mysterious message flashed through his mind out of nowhere. The message seemed to have appeared out of thin air. If it were not for Luo Fan's extremely sharp senses and meticulous control of himself, he might have thought that he had suddenly thought of this information. The 9th round of the blood battle that belongs to you begins now. There's no time limit for this blood battle. All you have to do is challenge the creator at the right moment, and you'll be able to complete the blood battle and leave this battlefield. If you defeat the creator, you'll be the creator and have eternal life. You'll have omnipotent power. Your competitors will be the powerhouses who have survived countless blood battles in the past, and those who will come in the future. Work hard in cultivating and fighting. The creator. That was the content of the message. The message contained a sense of heroism that controlled everything, making Luo Fan's blood boil. As expected, apart from a portion of the experts in this world that were naturally born in this world, most of the others were accumulated from the countless bloody battles that took place in the past. Every blood battle lasts for millions of years, and the living beings in this world cultivate so quickly. To be able to have such a scale of powerhouses is also a matter of course. At this time, Luo Fan was completely convinced of his previous guess. He looked up at the sky of this world. His gaze pierced through space and time, and he could vaguely see a majestic palace floating in the middle of the world. Within that palace, there was an incomparably powerful will overlooking the entire battlefield, overlooking the entire dreamscape. The willpower was so strong that Luo Fan couldn't even measure its specific strength at this time, let alone contend with it. Of course, it was not because the powerhouse was much stronger than Luo Fan, but because Luo Fan was still restricted by the dream world. He had only recovered an extremely small portion of his strength, which was not enough to give him the perception ability he had when he was at his peak. Naturally, it was impossible for him to truly measure how powerful an existence that was even stronger than when he was at his peak was. When he sensed this, Luo Fan understood that it was impossible for him to win if he challenged the powerhouse on the other side with his current strength. As a result, he suppressed his urge to fly up and challenge the Dragon King. He decided to accumulate his strength in this world so that he could recover all the power he had. If it was possible, it would be even better if he could find the secrets of the transcendent realm through this recovery process and achieve the transcendent realm. With a thought, Luo Fan looked at himself. His gaze moved upwards. He had reached an indescribable state, and he could see the shackles that locked his body. He was slightly taken aback by what he saw. The shackles were already filled with cracks. Although he was still tightly locked in place, it seemed like he only needed to exert a little bit of force to completely shatter it and render it useless. In fact, he could even sense that the vast power and other abilities that had been sealed in him were constantly rippling, as if they could break through the shackles and return to his body at any time. The shackles have become like this. It seems like it's the effect of the blood battle. Luo Fan couldn't help but guess. The last time he saw the shackles was not that long ago, which was when he was on the 5th floor of the World Pyramid. At that time, although the shackles were much looser than they were at the beginning, there wasn't even the slightest crack on them. The entire shackles seemed indescribably stable, as if they would not be damaged even if the entire universe collapsed. It was not like this, where a slight tremble could completely shatter it. As he stood there, Luo Fan had a faint expression on his face, and his heart was filled with indescribable joy. This was because the shackles had become like this, which meant that he was no longer as powerless as before. It meant that he could break the shackles through various methods and directly summon his power, spirit, perception, willpower, physical strength, and so on back into his body, allowing his strength to return to its peak and perfected Tao integration state. At that time, he would have absolute confidence. He was confident that he would be able to see exactly how powerful the existence at the center of the world was. From there, he would be able to find a way to defeat him, break the shackles of the dreamscape, and pass the 9,993rd trial on the path of transcendence. He would do it as soon as he thought of it. Luo Fan looked around and was just about to find a barely livable place to cultivate in seclusion when he suddenly saw the void distort slightly. Suddenly, he saw the void distort slightly, and a figure appeared out of thin air several hundred feet above him, looking down at him. This person was a young man in his 20s. He looked extremely simple and unadorned, and he exuded a peerlessly powerful aura. This aura impacted the surrounding void and even caused the void to ripple slightly, as if it could not withstand the impact of this aura at any time. The power that this person possessed right now, compared to Luo Fan, he was dozens of times stronger. Although he didn't have a specific realm, his strength alone was enough to crush the current Luo Fan. This person clearly thought the same. He looked at Luo Fan as if he was looking at a fat sheep or a piece of meat on a chopping board. He was high and mighty. Taking from him was even more irritating. I didn't expect my luck to be so good today. I actually met a newcomer, the man muttered as he looked at Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at this person and frowned. Then, he relaxed a little and a faint smile appeared on his face. Although this person's gaze and attitude made him feel extremely displeased, this person's appearance gave him the opportunity to directly observe the specific appearance of this world. Perhaps he would be able to find out where the most suitable place for him to improve his strength. In comparison, being able to meet this person was an extremely good thing. Although the strength of the person in front of him was more than 10 times his current strength, Luo Fan did not take him seriously at all. The power he was currently able to display, it was tens of millions of times more powerful than the power in his body at the moment. Under such circumstances, even if the person before him was able to unleash a strength that was 10,000 times stronger than his own, he was still just like an ant to him. They were existences that could be destroyed with a wave of their hands. Under such circumstances, he naturally did not need to consider this person's threat. He directly treated this person as a piece of meat on his chopping board. At this moment, Luo Fan and that person were standing on top of a mountain, while the other was standing in midair. The difference in strength between the two was more than 10 times, but both of them were filled with endless self-confidence, treating the other as a fat piece of meat that they could plunder at will. That person looked at Luo Fan's expression and a cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "It seems like you think that you're invincible after passing through 8 rounds of the bloody battles. Now, I'll show you how terrifying a true expert is." After he finished speaking, his body shook and the void shattered in an instant. His figure appeared in front of Luo Fan almost at the same time. His right hand directly appeared next to Luo Fan's neck. It looked like he was about to choke and directly lock onto all of Luo Fan's power. Such a speed of attack was truly terrifying. If it was someone else who was facing this attack, perhaps such a move would be enough to make them suffer and really become a piece of meat on the chopping board. However, it was Luo Fan who was facing this attack. Although such an attack was extremely fast and almost transcended time and space, to him, it was simply a method used by children to fight. He did not even need to move at all. The power in his body fluctuated slightly, and a bright red power directly erupted from the person's body, directly dyeing the person bright red. As the person's color changed, it was as if all of his bones and strength had been pulled out. He directly fell to the ground. Even his right hand that was already next to Luo Fan's neck could not be retracted. It directly slid down and smashed onto the ground with Luo Fan's body. How is this possible? The person was tongue-tied. He could not believe that he had been defeated so cleanly by a creature that was as weak as an ant in front of him. At this moment, he almost suspected that he was in a dream and that he was in an extremely absurd nightmare. This world was boundless, and there were countless resources that could be provided for the cultivation of warriors who had passed through 8 rounds of bloody battles, allowing them to continuously improve their strength. However, this world was also filled with countless dangers. There were many experts in it, and this person could only be considered an existence at the bottom of the hierarchy. Although he was still able to suppress some of the more useless warriors, there were even more people above his head, causing him to almost be unable to breathe. In any world, even if it was a world with incomparably rich resources that could not be used up, most of the resources would definitely be in the hands of the strongest. This meant that no matter how extravagant and wasteful the experts were, there would be endless resources for them to squander, while the weak who were not strong enough, no matter how hard they worked. No matter how hard they worked, they would not be able to find enough resources for them to survive and cultivate. This world was no exception. With this person's strength, he could easily crush all living beings who had just stepped into this world. However, in this world, he belonged to the group of weaklings who could not find enough resources to cultivate no matter how hard he worked. It was precisely because he was a weakling who could not find enough resources to cultivate. Therefore, although he had entered this world for tens of millions of years, which meant that he was only a survivor of dozens of bloody battles, his strength was only this little bit. He was only 10 times stronger than Luo Fan, who had just stepped into this world. In other worlds, such speed was already a rather shocking achievement. However, in this world where strength could be obtained in an instant, such speed was simply useless. And the reason why he was so eager to subdue a newcomer like Luo Fan was because he wanted to exchange Luo Fan for cultivation resources with the experts. To the experts, they no longer needed more resources. What they needed was new stimulation and new enlightenment. And the information brought by newcomers, the path of development of the world during the bloody battles, was such stimulation. It was the existence that could bring them new enlightenment. Therefore, to the experts of this world, a newcomer like Luo Fan was an extremely precious existence. It was enough for them to spend a huge amount of resources to exchange for him. Luo Fan raised his hand and covered the person's head. With a slight thought, the special ability of the flag technique was activated. All of the person's memories flashed through his mind like a movie. In an instant, Luo Fan already knew everything about this world. He also understood why this person was so eager to capture him. So that's how it is. Looks like there's a better way to recover my strength. Luo Fan smiled and let go of the person. After Luo Fan let go of him, the person let out a long breath. The breath of life on his body left him. He had died. This was not a side effect of Luo Fan activating the ability to read memories. In fact, that ability did not have any side effects. If Luo Fan wanted to, he could even make the person not feel anything. The real reason why he died at this moment was that Luo Fan did not want him to live anymore. To someone who wanted to deal with him, he would never be soft-hearted. This person wanted to capture him to exchange for resources without saying a word. If he were to be polite to him, no matter how much he praised him, he would only be judged as a soft-hearted person. Through that person's memory, Luo Fan already knew that in this area. Whereas the expert with the most resources. At this moment, he did not stop. He used an even more powerful ground shrinking technique to head towards that location. That powerhouse was not the strongest in this area. At least, according to Luo Fan's senses, the aura on his body was not the most majestic in this area. If it were not for the guidance of that person's memory, even if Luo Fan wanted to find the expert with the most resources to help his cultivation, he would not have thought of that person. Even if he randomly chose an expert who was closest to him, it would not have been that person. From the looks of it, that person's memory came at the right time. It saved Luo Fan a lot of unnecessary trouble. The power of the ground shrinking technique that Luo Fan used at this moment was many times stronger than a normal ground shrinking technique. In just a few dozen breaths, he had crossed a distance of tens of millions of miles and arrived in front of a huge city. This city was tall and majestic. It was full of life, and there were tens of millions of intelligent creatures living in it. The expert with the most resources or at least the most resources in this area, was in this city. Luo Fan had come here to fight for resources, not to visit a friend. Hence, he did not stay outside the city for even a moment and directly stepped into the city. Although there were countless defensive measures around the city, and even countless defensive arrays, these arrays were useless to Luo Fan. Passing through these defenses, it was as if he was passing through the air without the slightest hindrance, and directly arrived at the center of the city, where the experts resided. This world was the world of the bloody battlefield, where the final round of the bloody battlefield would be held. There were originally no ordinary living creatures in this world. Even if there were, they would be extremely powerful and could threaten any expert who had passed through the first 8 rounds of the bloody battlefield. However, most of the living creatures in this city were ordinary living creatures. The strongest among them was only equivalent to an ordinary person. They were even dozens of times weaker than the experts who had participated in the first round of the bloody battlefield. Luo Fan scanned through these living creatures and understood their nature. These living beings were not fake living beings, nor were they robots, mechanical puppets, or anything like that. They were real creatures that had self-awareness, could resist, and had emotions. However, they were different from real living creatures. They were not born from the world. They were living creatures created by the experts in the building in front of Luo Fan. They all possessed the aura of the expert in front of him that was hidden very well. Chapter 955. The powerhouse in the building in front of him was thousands of times stronger than the one Luo Fan had encountered before. In fact, it was tens of thousands of times stronger than Luo Fan. From this kind of power, it could be seen just how great the difference in strength between the many experts in the final bloody battlefield was. It must be known that the person in front of him was definitely not the most powerful existence in this battlefield. At most, he could only be considered to be in the middle, but he was already thousands of times more powerful than the one Luo Fan had encountered before. It was easy to imagine just how powerful the strongest expert was. Luo Fan did not conceal his arrival. The moment he arrived outside the building, the aura in the building surged into the sky and pressed down on him in an extremely violent manner. It directly wrapped around him and locked him in from all directions. For a newcomer, you're really too bold. A soft shout rang in Luo Fan's ears. Next, a figure appeared several feet in front of Luo Fan. It was a young man with a handsome face and a slender and fit figure. He looked extremely charming. The person was currently floating in the air. As the power in his body fluctuated, the entire city seemed to have become one with him. The power of the entire city seemed to be able to condense on his body at any time. At that moment, the person's expression seemed to be as if he had encountered something extremely ridiculous. He could not help but laugh and felt a little disdainful. He floated there and looked at Luo Fan with the same gaze as the person Luo Fan had encountered before. It was just that there was less greed. Since you've delivered yourself to me, that's great. You've saved me a lot of trouble. Completely project your memories into this memory stone. The person casually tossed out a fist-sized, translucent, crystal-like stone that gave off an inextinguishable charm shot towards Luo Fan. It appeared in front of him in an instant and stopped steadily. Just this small movement alone was enough to show how superb this person's control over his power was. Seeing this, Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. I didn't expect it to be like this. I originally planned to use a more tactful method, but now it seems that there is no need for that. As he spoke, he struggled, and the powerful aura that had locked onto him exploded, and he broke free. The city lord was shocked. Right now, what had locked on a Luo Fan was not just his aura, but also the aura of the entire city. Under normal circumstances, with Luo Fan's power, even if he blew himself up, he would not be able to shake this aura. This was also the reason why he had the confidence to appear in front of Luo Fan. But at this moment, the weak ant before him had only struggled a little, but his aura had already lost its source of strength and collapsed. Not to mention locking onto this person, it was already difficult for him to even sense this person. It was as if this person had disappeared from this space in an instant. How could this person not be shocked by this strange power that far exceeded his own strength? Luo Fan did not stop at all. He raised his hand and slapped it. A large flag seemed to transcend space and directly appeared above the person's head, colliding with his head. In an instant, an extremely strong tremor was produced. This tremor did not come from the person in front of him, but from the entire city. As the tremor spread, whether it was the person's body, the entire city, or even all the living beings in the city, they all began to rapidly collapse. In the blink of an eye, the entire city was razed to the ground. The powerhouse who had looked at Luo Fan with disdain had also disappeared without a trace. He had been directly blown into pieces by the flag, as if he had never appeared. At this moment, the memory stone was still floating in front of Luo Fan, waiting for Luo Fan to receive it just like before. Luo Fan naturally would not stand on ceremony. He raised his hand, and the memory stone landed in his hand. With a thought, he understood all the mysteries of the memory stone, as well as all its principles. As it turned out, it was just an artifact that carried a portion of the strange laws of this world. Due to the enhancement of this battlefield world, it was able to perform many wondrous functions. The ability to carry memories was unleashed to the extreme, and the amount of memories it could carry was incomparably huge. This kind of memory stone was of no use to him at all, and he was too lazy to waste his storage space with it. With a casual pat, the memory stone exploded with a loud bang, directly turning into countless stone powder that scattered in all directions. With a ripple in the air, it disappeared without a trace. At this moment, the city had already been reduced to ruins. All the defenses within were naturally useless to Luo Fan. With a thought, he found the place where the expert had stored the resources. With a thought, Zhang Xian took a step forward and disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, he was already thousands of kilometers underground. He was at the place where he had previously stood, the center of the city. When he went underground, he saw a huge door in front of him. Next to the door stood over a dozen ferocious statues. Every single one of these statues was an extremely ferocious creature of this battlefield world. If every single one of them was truly alive, they would be able to fight back and forth with the owner of this city. Although they would definitely lose in the end, with over a dozen of them together, it would be enough to crush him. When Luo Fan stepped into this position, these sculptures slightly shook and the aura of their bodies skyrocketed. In an instant, they transformed from their original sculptures into real living beings. Obviously, the statues were only a disguise or a seal. The living creatures in front of him were their true appearances. In this regard, Luo Fan did not feel the slightest bit surprised. Although he did not know what method that person would use to protect the door, it was obvious that the door would not just be placed in front of him without any protection. The statue in front of him had turned into a living creature, but that was just an interesting way of protecting it. Facing a dozen or so powerful exotic beasts, each of which could threaten that person, Luo Fan only smiled faintly. His strength was not even a 10,000th of that person's, yet he could easily take care of them. These exotic beasts were obviously weaker than that person and posed no threat to him at all. He only raised his hand slightly and clapped. He did not even need to condense the image of the flag. A bright red light flashed, and the dozen exotic beasts directly collapsed, turning into dust and disappearing without a trace. Even after they disappeared, their roars were still echoing in the underground space. After wiping out the dozen exotic beasts, the door in front of him was like a little lamb in Luo Fan's eyes. It no longer had any ability to resist. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and gently pushed forward. A huge force acted on the huge door in front of him. In an instant, cracking sounds could be heard. Something was forcefully extrapolated from behind the door. The entire door directly opened, revealing a huge underground space. The underground space was extremely vast and huge. The entire space seemed to be tens of thousands of kilometers in circumference, and the height was several kilometers. The entire space was densely packed with shelves, boxes, and even many kinds of treasures that were wantonly shuttling back and forth in the space. An incomparably rich medicinal aroma and fragrance madly poured into Luo Fan's nostrils, making him feel that the cracks on the shackles that were locking him had become even finer. There are actually so many treasures here. Looks like I made the right choice coming here. Luo Fan let out a long breath, looking rather happy. The cracks that appeared on the shackles locking him down were caused by him stepping into this battlefield world. That meant that this battlefield world had endless benefits for unlocking the shackles. Just existing in this world already had so many benefits. In that case, by absorbing the various heavenly and earthly treasures in this world, he would naturally be able to do even better with the help of the wondrous resources in this world. Breaking the shackles should not be something unbelievable. The entire space was filled with precious cultivation resources. Not only were there all kinds of materials for refining weapons and magic treasures, but there were also all kinds of exotic plants and fruits that were beneficial to the cultivation of experts. There were even many finished products that had been refined and were similar to pills. As for the materials used to refine weapons and treasures, Luo Fan naturally did not care too much about them. To him, his power was the strongest weapon and treasure. As long as he knew the structure of any treasure, he did not need any materials. He would naturally be able to condense the power that the structure could unleash the greatest power. Why would he need any weapons or treasures? What he cared about was that this underground space was filled with countless strange flowers and herbs, as well as all sorts of miraculous fruits and finished pills that were beneficial to cultivation. With how huge this space was, it was easy to imagine the amount of resources contained within it. There were all sorts of exotic flowers, herbs, and fruits that were useful to cultivation, and they could be counted in tons. Luo Fan's thoughts swept through the entire space. In an instant, he had already completely grasped everything in this space. Even he could not help but feel shocked after learning about the specific situation in this space. It would take at least tens of millions of years to gather so many resources, but they're actually piled up here. What a waste. Sighing, Luo Fan unceremoniously raised his hand and waved. Countless exotic flowers and herbs, wonderful fruits, and all kinds of finished products like medicinal pills directly floated up from all over the space, converged into a river, and frantically poured into his sleeve. He had already used the basic principles of the world within the sleeve to open up a storage space with the nature of his power. This was a version of the world within the sleeve technique. The amount of resources that Luo Fan was interested in this space was extremely shocking. However, for his world within the sleeve technique, it was not a problem at all. Even if the amount increased by 100 times, it could easily accommodate it. The process of gathering resources lasted for a few days before it stopped. By then, the entire underground space was already half empty. Meanwhile, a considerable amount of resources had been accumulated in Luo Fan's world within the sleeve technique. After collecting these resources, Luo Fan did not have the slightest reluctance. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. As the void distorted, his figure disappeared from this underground space. He was completely dismissive of the resources that existed in this underground space to refine weapons and magic treasures. He was not even willing to waste a bit of his world within the sleeve technique to store them. In fact, many of those resources could be used by Luo Fan and could greatly enhance his combat power. If Luo Fan wanted to, it would not be a problem for him to use them to refine a magic treasure that surpassed the Great Perfection Realm. In fact, if he put in some effort, it would not be a problem for him to refine a magic treasure that was on par with it. However, Luo Fan was not interested in this at all. After all, this was only a dream world. Although it was between projection and reality, it was not completely illusory. However, no matter how powerful the magic treasures refined from the various materials here were, once they left this dream world, even if they still existed, their power would be greatly reduced. Normally, even if it was a magic treasure of the same level as a Dao integration expert, it was extremely rare for it to remain at the Great Perfection Realm after leaving this dream world. Obviously, the difficulty of refining a magic treasure of the Great Perfection Realm and a magic treasure of the same level as a Dao integration expert was like heaven and earth. Normally, it would take hundreds of thousands of years to refine a magic treasure of the great perfection realm. However, it would take hundreds of billions of years to refine a magic treasure of the same level as a Tao integration expert. Naturally, Luo Fan would not do such a stupid thing if he wasted hundreds of billions of years and endless energy only to obtain a magic treasure of the great perfection realm. As for whether this magic treasure would be helpful for him to challenge a great perfection quasi-sage after successfully refining it, it was needless to say. As for a great perfection quasi-sage, unless he was strong enough, it would be useless no matter how many of them there were. Although a magic treasure of the same level as a Tao integration expert was infinitely powerful, it would only be a matter of a slap to a great perfection quasi-sage. How could Luo Fan rely on it? It was for these reasons that Luo Fan did not care about the endless refining resources. However, it was completely different for the rare herbs and elixir refining resources that were helpful for one's cultivation. At this moment, the shackles of this dream world were what restricted Luo Fan's strength. As long as he could break free from these shackles, he would naturally be like a carp leaping through the dragon's gate. From then on, he would have a bright future. He did not need to care about whether these refined products would be useful after leaving this dream world. In this way, the more resources he had, the better. He would not give up on any of them. After leaving the underground space, Luo Fan appeared in the ruins of the original city. Although several days had passed, the ruins were still the same as they were when Luo Fan left. No one had come here to wait for him to take revenge, and not a single living being's aura had swept over this place. After all, this battlefield world was massive. Although there were countless living beings, the distance between each other was extremely great due to the vastness of the world. Under such circumstances, not to mention a few days, even if it were years or decades, there might not be any experts who would be able to discover that the city had already been erased. Moreover, even if someone discovered that this place had been erased, they might not necessarily be willing to stand up for that person and deal with the existence that could erase this city. As such, it was only natural for such a situation to occur. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and he understood everything. He shook his head with a slight smile and took a step forward. His figure had already disappeared without a trace. He directly used his special ability to move through the void and arrive in a cave in a barren land far away from where he was. The cave was originally the lair of a mutant bear with a strange fragrance. It was very wide and flat, and the smell was very pleasant. It did not have the stench of ordinary beast nests. This was also the most important reason why Luo Fan had chosen this place. As for the mutant bear that had originally lived here, it naturally did not need to be mentioned. It directly became a pill refining material that Luo Fan needed. Although the mutant bear was dozens of times more powerful than the mutant beasts he had encountered in the underground space portal, and was the overlord of an area of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, it was just an ant to Luo Fan. He could destroy it with a wave of his hand. After casually cleaning up the space, Luo Fan used his own power to condense a huge bright red pill furnace in front of him. The power used by this pill furnace was simulated by Luo Fan. It was the power of pill refining that he had comprehended in the previous dream world. Its battle power was not strong, but it was extremely suitable for pill refining. After this pill furnace was formed, the entire space in the cave seemed to be squeezed and slid in all directions. It was as if the space within the pill furnace was a separate entity, completely separated from the outside world. Or perhaps it was completely created by itself. This dream world was completely different from the previous one. Even the fundamental rules and laws were worlds apart. However, this was a relatively perfect and self-justifying world after all. Since it was such a world, some of the most basic principles were definitely universal. Therefore, some of the mysteries of alchemy that Luo Fan had comprehended in the previous dreamscape that could be used in the outside world could also be used in this dreamscape. Of course, only the mysteries of alchemy, such as refining pills, could be used. This world had such strict restrictions on power. If one wanted to rely on the mysteries of alchemy to cultivate and improve one's strength, it was naturally impossible to think about it. Sensing that the effect of this pill furnace was better than he had imagined, Luo Fan could not help but smile. He raised his hand and pointed. Endless resources that he had obtained in the underground space surged into the pill furnace. At the same time, bright red flames appeared out of nowhere at the bottom of the cauldron, continuously burning the cauldron. Chapter 956. The moment the ingredients poured into the cauldron, the entire cave was filled with a faint pill fragrance. Moreover, this pill fragrance continued to grow stronger, as if it was about to reach an inconceivable level. From this, one could see just how mysterious this cauldron was. The moment the ingredients poured into it, it was actually able to cause endless changes and emit all sorts of fragrances that could only be found in a finished pill. The amount of pill ingredients Luo Fan had obtained in the underground space was so great that it had taken him several days to collect them. Now that he had to sort them and send them into the cauldron according to a specific ratio, it was naturally not something that could be completed quickly. Thus, he spent an entire month before he finally sent the last pill ingredient that was suitable for him into the cauldron. Among them included the essence of the variant bear that he had destroyed earlier. Although the cauldron was only 10 feet tall and appeared to be extremely narrow, the interior of the cauldron had its own space. Even though the amount of alchemy ingredients that Luo Fan had poured into the cauldron was equivalent to a 1,000,000 feet tall mountain, the cauldron did not force itself to completely contain it. After all the alchemy ingredients poured in, the cauldron looked no different from when it was first formed. When the last ingredient was poured in, the medicinal fragrance that had originally filled the entire cave suddenly shook. In an instant, it rose at an unimaginable speed. It seemed as if it was about to solidify and turn into a pill river. At this moment, with a thought from Luo Fan, a lid appeared on the cauldron and directly sealed the only opening of the cauldron. Following this change, the almost solidified fragrance suddenly froze. Then, it gradually disappeared. After a few breaths, it was as if it had never appeared in the first place, completely disappearing without a trace. This was one of the wonders of this cauldron. A truly perfect cauldron would naturally have an extremely powerful ability to seal medicinal properties. This cauldron Luo Fan had even borrowed the mysteries of the times. One could imagine how powerful it was. Naturally, one could imagine its ability to seal medicinal properties. The medicinal fragrance that had filled the cave was, in fact, the external manifestation of the medicinal properties of the pill. Once the medicinal properties were completely sealed, the medicinal fragrance would naturally disappear. The pill inheritance that Luo Fan had received went from the basics to the great success quasi-sage level. In other words, he had reached the transcendent level. After obtaining so many pill inheritances, regardless of which world he was in, he would definitely be called a pill grandmaster, even in the previous dream realm. With his knowledge of alchemy, it was naturally a simple task for him to use the countless alchemy resources in this battlefield world to create a pill that could break through the shackles of the world and allow him to regain all of his strength. What he was concocting at this moment was precisely such a pill. Because this pill was too special, it was only useful in this dream realm and even in this battlefield world. Therefore, he was too lazy to give this pill a name. Therefore, this pill could be called the Nameless Pill. The method to refine the Nameless Pill was not complicated. All he had to do was to extract the medicinal properties that Luo Fan needed from each of the ingredients. Then, he would use the principles of the Pill Tao to condense the countless medicinal properties into a pill. With this method, as long as he found the medicinal properties that he needed, not to mention Luo Fan, even an ordinary cultivator in the early quasi-sage level could easily refine the pill. However, this did not mean that it would be easy for Luo Fan to obtain the pill. Although the refinement method was not difficult, one should not forget that the number of materials needed to refine the pill had reached an astronomical level. Even if the process was not complicated, it would definitely take a long time to extract a specific medicinal effect from such a large number of materials. Didn't you see that it took half a month just to send these materials into the alchemy furnace? The original owner of this cave, the variant bear that Luo Fan had casually killed, was not the strongest in this battlefield world, but he was still a dominant existence. Therefore, he naturally had control over a large territory. Within a radius of several million kilometers, no living being dared to provoke him. Therefore, while Luo Fan lived here, he did not have to worry about other living beings coming to disturb him for a short period of time. From the beginning, this process of refining the pill lasted for 3 years. On a certain day after 3 years, Luo Fan suddenly opened his eyes. 2 bright red rays of light flashed through his eyes. The entire cave shook violently with the flash of the mysterious light. It was as if even time and space were being shaken by the light. Within the mysterious light, his thoughts moved slightly, and the cauldron that had been in front of him for 3 years trembled slightly. The flames below it began to recede, and soon they completely disappeared. The cauldron gradually sank as well, finally standing firmly on the ground. Its aura was completely withdrawn, and there was no longer any difference between it and an ordinary dead object. At this moment, an extremely powerful pressure suddenly surged from above, making Luo Fan feel as if his life could be extinguished at any time. It was a sense of danger that he had never felt before. It was as if there was a supreme existence above him that could destroy him with a single swipe of its mind. It was looking at him with an extremely malicious gaze. This feeling made Luo Fan frown. He understood what was going on after giving it some thought. So, this is the pill tribulation, the thought flashed through his mind. The pill tribulation was a type of tribulation in the way of alchemy. When a pill that could threaten the world was born, the world would send down a tribulation to destroy the pill. The more threatening the pill was to the world, the more powerful the tribulation would be. Even before Luo Fan received the inheritance of the way of alchemy, he knew about the concept of the pill tribulation. However, whether it was what he knew in the past or what he heard after receiving the inheritance of the way of alchemy, it clearly told him that this kind of pill tribulation was very, very rare. It could only be regarded as something that only existed in legends. This was not because the way of alchemy was not profound enough, but because the worlds that Luo Fan had experienced were too powerful. They were so powerful that no pill could threaten them. Or the worlds that Luo Fan had experienced. The primordial world, the great Tianyuan world, the Earth's universe, and even what he had experienced on the path of transcendence were all projections of the Earth's universe. All of these worlds were at least perfect worlds. They were powerful worlds that were countless times more powerful than the vast thousand realms. The great Tianyuan world was even more powerful than the perfect worlds. Such an existence could exist eternally in the state of chaos. How could a mere pill destroy it? As for the other worlds he had stayed in, such as the vast thousand worlds, although they could be destroyed by pills, they could not escape the control of the perfect world they were in. Whether they produced a pill tribulation or not depended on the perfect world outside. Naturally, it was impossible for a pill tribulation to occur because of the appearance of pills. Due to these reasons, although Luo Fan knew about the existence of pill tribulations, he had never seen one before. At this moment, the world that he was in was not a perfect world, but a dream world. Such a world was completely created by a great completion quasi-saint in the dream world, but it was not attached to a perfect world. It could be said that it was more independent than any other vast thousand worlds and had the ability to produce its own pill tribulations. Moreover, because it was merely a dream world, no matter how grand the creation was, even if it was more valiant than a perfect world, it was still a dream world. It was still limited by a great accomplishment quasi-sage. Naturally, it had the ability to be destroyed by pills. Because of this, pill tribulations could truly appear. These thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan understood everything. He could not help but show a look of anticipation in his eyes. After all, He had received the inheritance of the Pill Tao. Although the path he walked was not the Pill Tao, he could not help but want to explore the various mysteries of the Pill Tao. Pill tribulations were rare, so he was naturally not willing to let it go so easily. He saw that above him, where the wall of the cave used to be, had turned into nothingness. Above the nothingness, a boundless mass of dark clouds covered the sky and earth. The dark clouds contained boundless energy, and there were muffled sounds coming from within. There were also faint traces of lightning that were so strong that the thick clouds could not conceal them and shot down. The intense and unparalleled sense of threat came from the dark clouds. The sense of threat was so strong that he did not even feel such a sense of threat from the Creator, who was at the center of the world. It was as if the power contained in the clouds was stronger than that of the Creator. After a slight test, Luo Fan felt that the bright red cauldron formed by his power had been completely locked by a shocking power. It was as if it had become real. No matter how hard he tried, he could not open it, let alone get past the power to take out the formed pill. Indeed, it's just like the legends. If I don't pass the pill tribulations, I won't be able to obtain the pill. Luo Fan sighed and finally abandoned all thoughts of dodging. He gathered his fighting spirit and prepared to resist the terrifying pill tribulations. Passing the pill tribulations was nothing new to Luo Fan. He had passed the immortal ascension tribulation when he achieved the immortal Tao in the primordial world. However, the tribulation back then was only a test from heaven and earth. As long as he was strong enough to meet the requirements of immortal ascension, not only would he not be harmed, but he would also receive great benefits. However, the pill tribulations before him were completely different from the immortal ascension tribulation that he had passed. This pill tribulations was a tribulation that heaven and earth used to completely erase the pills that could threaten it. It was a method to eliminate all threats. Therefore, even the weakest pill tribulations could not be compared to the strongest immortal Tao tribulations. In particular, judging from the threat of the tribulation clouds in the sky, the pills that Luo Fan had refined clearly could not be the weakest to heaven and earth. Naturally, the pill tribulations could not be the weakest either. Although his life was in great danger, Luo Fan did not panic at all. His fighting spirit was not affected at all. Instead, it was rising crazily in an unimaginable way. With a thought, he took a step forward and appeared directly above the cauldron. He stood between the tribulation clouds and the cauldron. The pill tribulations targeted the pills. Although they did not completely let him off while he was refining the pills, the pressure and the ability to lock onto him were much weaker than that of the pills. Because of this, he was able to move so easily. However, when he arrived above the cauldron, the pill tribulations would no longer be polite to him. Almost all the pressure was concentrated on his body, causing him to instantly feel his entire body become heavy. It was as if there were billions of mountains directly pressing down on his body, wanting to directly crush his body into minced meat and into powder. Facing such a terrifying pressure, Luo Fan could not help but feel his body sink. He sat directly on the cauldron. Fortunately, the cauldron was mysterious and unusual. Although it had been burned for 3 years, there was no residual heat. It was still the same temperature as when the pills were first condensed. Otherwise, he would have enjoyed the feeling of being roasted, as expected of the legendary pill tribulations. Luo Fan did not panic at all. He merely thought so. With that thought, the power in his body moved slightly. A bright red light shot out from his body and dyed his entire body bright red. Within this bright red light, countless gigantic shackles appeared around his body, tightly wrapping around his body. However, there were also countless fine cracks on the shackles. Amidst this change, Luo Fan's entire body became lighter. The terrifying pressure that was originally placed on his body suddenly lightened, completely isolated, and could no longer affect him in the slightest. The shackles that were illuminated by the bright red light were none other than the world shackles. Just like how, if there was a light shining in the darkness, it could reveal the things hidden in the darkness, this bright red light could also reveal the invisible shackles of the world. As for the pressure produced by the pill tribulations, it was needless to say. The world shackles could even completely lock on a Luo fan's vast power, soul, perception, willpower, physical strength, and so on. How could he not withstand the slight pressure produced by the pill tribulations? The dark clouds above finally gathered enough power. With a sudden shake, a huge human figure condensed from lightning was directly struck out by the dark clouds. Holding a drumstick, it pounced straight at Luo Fan. The void in space-time in its path seemed to shatter. He didn't seem to have passed through any space, nor did he pass through any time. As soon as he was struck, he directly appeared above Luo Fan's head. The drumstick, which was like a small hill, was almost touching Luo Fan's head. This figure was 1,000 feet tall. Its face was blurry, and it was covered in gorgeous armor. This armor was blue in nature, but there were colorless and transparent flames wrapped around it. Clearly, it was condensed from thunderfire. Countless strange lights and shadows flickered wildly around this figure. Among these lights and shadows, there seemed to be countless people worshiping, praying, and cursing. The surrounding cave, which had originally been only hundreds of thousands of feet in radius, seemed to have been expanded tens of thousands of times. At first glance, it seemed boundless, and one could not see the end. Clearly, the power of this figure had reached a certain limit. Wherever it existed, space and time would naturally expand. This was already much higher than using one's own power to destroy space. In the face of such a terrifying attack, Luo Fan only showed a slight smile on his face. He didn't make a move. The bright red light around him turned slightly, and the world shackles that were tightly entangled around him, which had countless fine cracks on them, turned slightly and appeared above his head, directly blocking in front of the huge drumstick. The power that the huge drumstick carried was so great that it could instantly destroy a great 1,000 worlds. However, the moment it struck the shackles, there was no sound at all. It was as if it had struck cotton, and all of its power was instantly sucked away. The drumstick went from extremely fast to extremely still, as if it had been born on the shackles. It could not affect Luo Fan at all. As for the shackles, after withstanding the bombardment of the drumstick that could instantly destroy a great 1,000 worlds, there was not even the slightest change. The cracks on it did not even increase in the slightest, as if the bombardment of the drumstick was just the gentle caress of a lover. As expected, the shackles of the world and the power of the pill tribulation cannot harm each other, thought Luo Fan. The world shackles were created by the dreamscape to restrict his power, divine soul, and other abilities. This pill tribulation was formed by the dream realm in order to exterminate the pills that threatened its existence. The two came from the same source, so it was naturally impossible for them to harm each other. Of course, the shackles of the world were invisible, while the attacks of the pill tribulation existed in a tangible form. The two could be said to exist in completely different space-time, so it was impossible for them to come into contact with each other. In other words, no matter how the pill tribulation bombarded Luo Fan, it would not affect the shackles of the world, nor would it be affected by the shackles of the world. The shackles of the world would only act as if they did not exist, allowing the pill tribulation to attack Luo Fan. However, with Luo Fan's means, this was not a normal situation. Since the shackles of the world had been illuminated by the mysteries of the times, they had naturally turned from invisible to tangible. They had originally existed in a completely different space-time from the pill tribulation, but now they were in the same place. The characteristic of not coming into contact with each other naturally disappeared, leaving behind only the characteristic of not harming each other. With this characteristic, Luo Fan, who could use all kinds of mysterious methods to guide the shackles of the world to protect himself, was basically invincible. No matter how strong the pill tribulation was, it was only a matter of time for him to pass it. Chapter 958. Without suffering any damage, the primordial deity, formed by lightning, naturally posed no threat to Luo Fan. He allowed the primordial deity to attack continuously, but he remained unhurried as he countered it with one move after another. In the end, he destroyed the primordial deity formed by lightning almost effortlessly. After the primordial deity was destroyed, the tribulation cloud in the sky split open an extremely magnificent lightning palace. From the lightning palace, densely packed lightning bolts soared into the sky, forming a mysterious array and pouncing towards Luo Fan. They directly collided with the world shackles surrounding his body, bursting out with astonishing attacks. Even the void was completely shattered, and even time seemed to freeze slightly. However, no matter how they attacked, they posed no threat to Luo Fan. They were still completely blocked by the world shackles and could not hurt him at all. Faced with this situation, how could Luo Fan still be anxious? He remained unhurried. He only needed to slightly block the army from attacking the alchemy furnace below him, and then he would attack them without any scruples. In the end, he completely obliterated them without suffering any damage. Countless armies continuously rushed out of the palace, but in the end, not a single one of them could escape the fate of being obliterated. In the end, the palace directly pressed down, wanting to use its terrifying weight to directly crush Luo Fan into powder. The final outcome was predictable. Although the palace was grand and vast, and even caused the cave, which had already expanded countless times due to the primordial deity formed by lightning at the beginning, to expand thousands of times as it pressed down, it was still formed by Dreamworld. To the world shackles that were also part of Dreamworld's power, they still could not destroy it, and naturally could not hurt Luo Fan. In the end, it was clear that Luo Fan easily destroyed it. After this wave, the tribulation cloud in the sky began to change, and the ground below Luo Fan also began to change. In the end, there was only empty space around Luo Fan. However, there was a huge and abnormally dense tribulation cloud above, while below was a boundless sea of fire. There were countless strange fire creatures surging in the sea of fire. These fire creatures were extremely powerful, and they had even evolved into various strange civilizations within the sea of fire. However, it was not peaceful to his left and right either. On his left was a boundless curtain of water. The curtain of water was pitch black, and it seemed to be able to devour everything. There were no living creatures within it, but it gave off an extremely destructive aura. On his right were endless whirlwinds. These whirlwinds were densely packed, and every single one of them was stirring space and time, causing the space on his right to be completely different from the space above and below him, as well as on his left. Even the flow of time seemed to be slightly different. Although there were no changes to his front and back, they were like two huge mouths, luring him towards these two directions. There was an indescribable sense of danger coming from these two directions. It was as if there was an even more powerful force hidden within, and it was just waiting for him to deliver himself to it. This was the true pill tribulation. The tribulation that appeared from the top, bottom, left, front, and back was not limited to just one type of attack. Any one of these 6 types of tribulations could make all cultivators despair if they were placed in the immortal Tao tribulation. They would know that they must have done something that infuriated the heavens and caused them to be punished by the heavens. They would be destroyed by the heavens, and their souls would scatter. Now that these 6 types of tribulations appeared at the same time, it was enough to show how terrifying this pill tribulation was, and how determined Dreamscape was to wipe out the pill. In the face of such a pill tribulation, Luo Fan only smiled slightly. Although there was an indescribable sense of danger in his heart, he did not panic at all. He even had the spare energy to think about some of the secrets of Dreamscape that the way the pill tribulation appeared represented. The forces from the top, bottom, left, right, front, and back were exerted at the same time. In an instant, endless fire deities, astral wind deities, water deities, lightning deities, and invisible mental demons all rushed towards Luo Fan at the same time. In an instant, Luo Fan's line of sight and even the range of his perception were completely drowned by the densely packed aura. These deities were not acting on their own. Instead, They were cooperating with each other in an extremely ingenious manner. When their powers were combined, the power they could unleash had reached an unimaginable level. In fact, they could unleash power that was countless times greater than their own, directly expanding the void to countless times its original size. It even formed an incomparably vast battlefield, causing the space that Luo Fan occupied to be less than 10 feet in circumference. However, he had to endure the simultaneous attacks of countless deities on the battlefield at the same time. Even if Luo Fan recovered to his peak and perfected Dao integration realm cultivation base, he would probably need to use all kinds of mysterious divine abilities and rely on the profound mysteries that he had comprehended from the tide of time to barely resist such an attack. If he were to use the power of his divine ability to resist it, then the final result would be that he would be lucky enough to escape with a trace of his divine soul. However, in the face of the countless deity supreme attacks that directly mobilized a certain supreme law and order in Dreamscape, Luo Fan's expression did not change at all. Bright red light fluctuated, and the world shackles wrapped around him and the pill furnace tightly, isolating Luo Fan and the pill furnace from the countless divine abilities and attacks. Without dodging, he allowed the attacks to hit the world shackles. The result was the same as before. Although those attacks could destroy tens of thousands of worlds, and could even cause almost irreversible damage to the perfect world, after colliding with the shackles of the world, they were like illusions and did not affect the shackles of the world in the slightest. They directly stopped there and stuck to the shackles, and even the cracks on the shackles did not change at all. They were still as thin and dense as before, as if they could shatter at any time. The whole process was unimaginably strange, but also showed an indescribable natural charm. This time, there were too many deities formed by flames, lightning, astral winds, and tribulation water to join the attack. There were so many that Luo Fan could not completely destroy them in a short period of time. Therefore, after being protected by the shackles, Luo Fan did not do anything. He only cultivated quietly and kept summoning his various powers from the gaps formed after the shackles were relaxed or broken. This allowed his power, spirit, willpower, perception, body toughness, and so on to be constantly improved. After he stepped into the last bloody battle, the world shackles that had locked him firmly naturally relaxed a little, and countless cracks appeared, allowing him to summon a lot of his power again. In the words of the living beings in this dreamscape, his potential had once again increased, just like the situation after each round of bloody battles. At this moment, his cultivation could also further increase his power and other aspects. According to his calculations, it could increase his power by at least 200 to 300 times. Such an increase was naturally of considerable benefit to the improvement of his strength. However, compared to directly shattering the world's shackles and recovering his perfected Dao integration realm and everything else, such an increase was insignificant. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan did not find a place to cultivate. Instead, he found powerhouses with many resources and snatched them. Then, he started to refine the nameless elixir pill that could break the world shackles. It was also because of this that such a shocking pill tribulation had appeared and broadened Luo Fan's horizons. At this moment, he started to cultivate and summon his power back not because he had changed his mind, but because he had nothing to do at the moment. This pill tribulation seemed extremely powerful. Even he felt somewhat helpless and did not want to waste too much energy to destroy it. However, a pill tribulation was a pill tribulation. No matter how powerful it was just a kind of tribulation. It could not exist forever. There would be a time when all the power would be exhausted and disappear. Under the protection of the world shackles, he did not need to care about the attacks of the pill tribulation at all. He could wait for a long time, and the pill tribulation would eventually disappear. In this way, it was obvious that he had free time to wait. It would naturally be a pity if he wasted such idle time. Luo Fan's cultivation lasted for a full 10 years. Over the past 10 years, the pill tribulation had been constantly changing. Countless attacks, attacks from the sea of people, attacks from elites, attacks from beasts, attacks from weapons and treasures, and so on. Almost every kind of attack that could be imagined had been greeted by Luo Fan. However, in the end, they could not affect him at all. Instead, the power of the tribulation was constantly being consumed during this process. On this day, after 10 years, it was finally consumed to its limit. In these 10 years, the powers from the 6 directions had already fused together, forming a spherical layer of clouds. All the powers were mixed together, revealing a strange grayish luster, wrapping Luo Fan and the alchemy furnace at the center of the sphere. The attacks were no longer as pure as before. Instead, they were also mixed together, forming a gray void. It constantly corroded where Luo Fan was, trying to assimilate Luo Fan within it. This was already a method of harming living beings in the state of chaos. After 10 years, the surrounding gray clouds had become extremely thin. The gray luster of the void that was enveloped by the clouds had also strengthened to an unbelievable level. It had even corroded and devoured all power, including space and time. Under such circumstances, based on Luo Fan's understanding of the tribulation, it was clearly at the end, and the tribulation would soon be over. I didn't expect it to last for 10 years. How terrifying! Sensing the changes in the surroundings, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. During these 10 years, Luo Fan had completely retrieved everything he could after the changes in the world shackles. At the moment, his power, spirit, willpower, perception, and physical strength had all reached nearly 500 times that when he had first stepped into the battlefield world. Due to the mysterious characteristics of the flag technique, his cultivation realm had directly broken through the limits of the void comprehending realm and entered the Dao integration realm, allowing him to become a Dao integration realm expert again. Of course, after all, he had used the characteristics of the flag technique to break through the shackles of his cultivation realm and become a Dao integration realm expert. His own power and other attributes had not even recovered to 1/1000th of their normal state. Even if he had become a Dao integration realm expert, his strength was still far from the strength he had when he had first become a Dao integration realm expert. In other words, although his cultivation realm had reached the Dao integration realm, even when he had just become a Dao integration realm expert, he could still see him as an ant at the moment, and a finger could crush his body and soul. Although he had made such shocking progress in his cultivation realm, the world shackles still existed and had not been broken by him. In fact, there was not even the slightest change compared to before. Not a single tiny crack had increased or expanded. Although he had cultivated for 10 years, he still could not break this world's shackles. This fact had long been within Luo Fan's expectations. The world's shackles were the shackles imposed on him by the entire dream realm. Even though there were countless cracks, and they seemed to be on the verge of collapsing and disappearing at any time, they were still the power of the entire world. It was still unimaginably difficult to completely break them. In Luo Fan's expectations, being able to achieve this within 1,000,000 years was already an astonishing speed. It was only natural that he had not achieved anything in a short 10 years. The surrounding gray void was obviously an attack that simulated the state of primal chaos. Of course, it was an extremely crude simulation. Compared to the true state of primal chaos, it wasn't even 1,000,000th as profound as it was. However, in terms of power, such a simulation was already many times more powerful than the attacks of countless primordial gods that had been condensed from countless different powers at the very beginning. If Luo Fan had not used a special method to turn the world's shackles that restricted his power around to protect himself, he might have been completely assimilated and devoured by this simulated chaotic void and eventually lost his life. Even if he had completely recovered to his peak at the perfect Dao integration stage, he might have been in an extremely sorry state and suffered great injuries. However, the situation was naturally different now. However, he was able to watch the simulated primal chaos void wear away bit by bit until it completely disappeared. It was as if he was watching a show. After a brief calculation, Luo Fan roughly estimated that the power of this pill tribulation would be completely exhausted in 3 days, and the simulated chaotic void would also completely disappear in 3 days. He could not help but smile inexplicably. With a slight thought, his body trembled, and he raised his hand to clench his fist and punched forward. The fist shadow, formed by bright red light, directly passed through the world's shackles that firmly protected him and directly blasted into the simulated chaotic void in front of him. It stirred up a violent fluctuation in the void, causing countless intense changes. There were even countless strange worlds and living beings vaguely being created in the stirring. Bright red light constantly wore down in the process, and in the end, it completely disappeared after a few dozen breaths, as if it had never appeared in the first place. The disappearance of the bright red fist was not without any effect, because it had consumed a large portion of the power of the pill tribulation, causing the world of the pill tribulation to end almost 5 minutes earlier. Luo Fan did not stop, nor did he change his method. He raised his hand and punched wildly. Countless bright red fist shadows continuously rushed out of the protection of the world's shackles and crashed into the simulated chaotic void outside, causing the simulated chaotic void to completely lose its original calm. It was as if countless boulders had been thrown into a pond, stirring up the world and turning it upside down, causing it to become extremely chaotic. Amidst the chaos, countless phantoms of worlds and living beings were constantly being born and destroyed. It was as if the true chaos was being stirred up by a terrifying power, constantly creating, and destroying worlds. This was quite mysterious, allowing Luo Fan to vaguely find the corresponding profundity of many of the wondrous techniques that he had comprehended in the past. Thus, his understanding of his own Dao attainment deepened. Although his Dao attainment realm did not increase, because of this, he felt that the bottleneck that had prevented him from breaking through to the perfected Dao integration realm had slightly loosened. However, it was only slightly. It was obviously wishful thinking to rely on this to break through the bottleneck. After all, this was only an extremely distorted and crude, chaotic simulation that had evolved from the pill tribulation in the dream world. The profundity contained in it was only pulled out from the profundity that the great perfection Sage-to-Be had comprehended. If Luo Fan had only just entered the Dao integration realm, or even reached the great perfection realm, he would naturally have obtained countless benefits from it, and his Dao attainment realm would have been greatly improved. However, he was already in the consummate Dao integration realm, which was equivalent to the transcendence realm. There was only a thin barrier between him and the Sage-to-Be great success in the transcendent realm. Although the mysteries comprehended by the Sage-to-Be in the great success were inspirations for him, they were not enough for him to break through directly. As Luo Fan bombarded with countless fist shadows, the power of the pill tribulation increased rapidly. Originally, it would have taken 3 days and 3 nights, a full 72 hours, to exhaust the power. In the end, it only took 2 hours for the power to be completely exhausted. When the last bit of the power of the pill tribulation was consumed, the entire battlefield world shook slightly. Every part of the world seemed to be experiencing a slight earthquake. Even the void above was no exception. Then, the light and shadow around Luo Fan instantly changed. The original appearance of the void around him disappeared, and he reappeared in the mutated bear's lair. Although it was huge, it was also an ordinary cave. Everything in the cave was the same as before the pill tribulation had appeared. It almost made people doubt whether the pill tribulation had ever appeared before. Luo Fan exhaled a long breath. With a thought, the alchemy furnace below him instantly collapsed, and a black pill that looked like a small mud ball appeared in his hand. It didn't emit any smell at all,